Hordes of goblins like a tidal wave advanced on the defenders, who had no choice but to engage in battle. The frontline commander ordered the tanks to fortify their positions and maintain formation, as any panic could spell disaster before the battle even began. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed stood the main character, ready to write his name in the history of this battle. Suddenly, the roar of a powerful explosion deafened everyone, sending clouds of smoke and debris flying into the air and hiding the battlefield behind a veil of destruction. One of the knights, overcome with fear, turned to the necromancer, reminding him of his promise to help and asking hopefully if it was possible right now. The hero only smiled, replying that since he was here as a mercenary, he would, of course, do his job. Without further ado, he raised his staff and easily summoned his necromantic power, tearing the veil between worlds. In response to his call, skeletons emerged from the darkness, each clutching various weapons in their bony fingers, ready to fight. Now, united with the humans, these grim warriors rushed into battle, confronting the enraged goblins who had long ruled these lands. A whisper spread through the group. Could it be that they were facing the very necromancer who had recently been spoken of as the strongest? And how had he ended up in this E-rank dungeon? Now it became clear to them why the leader of the group had remained so calm. He had hired a truly powerful ally. Listening to their conversation, the hero felt genuine joy, for his necromantic gift, so rare and powerful, was finally receiving the recognition it deserved. In a world where only 1,000 out of billions of people could be called necromancers, this profession was truly unique and mysterious. However, his abilities were still limited to summoning ordinary skeletons, and now he was facing only an E-rank warrior, devoid of any special power. He was well aware of his mediocrity, especially when he heard the fighters around him discussing his skeletons, disappointedly calling them ordinary. Many wondered why he summoned them at all. Was it just to demonstrate that even the weakest of the dead could pass through this dungeon? In reality, his real name was Ju Dong-hoon, and he was a cursed E-rank necromancer whose fate was inextricably linked to the souls of the dead. He could terrify his enemies with sinister spirits and poisonous spells, but the curse robbed him of all his power, leaving him with only skeletons. And sadly, that was why he looked with envy at the ordinary fighters who fought alongside him, possessing far more diverse powers. 10 years ago, when people began to receive unique abilities upon reaching the age of 20, his fate was already sealed. Unique abilities were distributed completely at random. Some received the gift of a blacksmith or a seamstress, while others had a much more exciting fate. Some were given support skills, reconnaissance, healing, strengthening allies. And although such abilities did not seem combat-oriented, without them, groups would not be able to survive. Many were dissatisfied, because fate distributed gifts indiscriminately, and some were less fortunate than they would have liked. However, despite the unfair distribution of powers, it was thanks to them that humanity managed to survive the brutal invasion of monsters. Ju Dong-hoon, however, considered himself lucky, because necromancy was a rare and enviable power that many dreamed of. Now his squad was rejoicing, glad that the skeletons, despite their mediocrity, had successfully cleared this simple dungeon. But even at that moment, Dong-hoon felt bitter, because his abilities were limited to the pathetic E-rank skeletons, and with such a gift, he was doomed to wander the dungeons endlessly. After finishing another sweep, he approached the group leader and calmly reported that his work for the day was done. The squad leader was satisfied, and Don Hong himself filled out a report, as required by the mercenary rules, ending the day. After that, the team headed back, promising each other to meet again at the earliest opportunity. On the way back, Don Hong felt a strange mixture of emotions inside, sighing deeply with a slight note of sadness. The thought of how absurd and strange this world was, where his abilities were on the verge of uselessness, swirled in his head. Although there were advantages to this, no one expected great achievements from him. Damn it, was that really how it should be? It seemed that fate had given him false hope, and at times he thought it would have been better to have a simple craft skill without any curses. Even with the title of necromancer, he earned a measly 40,000 won for a whole day of hard work in the dungeon. Recalling his previous part-time job, he bitterly realized that he had been paid much more for much less risky work. But despite this, he couldn't give up necromancy, because it was the only thing he wanted to do, when suddenly his attention was drawn to rumors of some important news. He was intrigued by talk of a mysterious Dark Lord who had recently managed to clear the Moon Rift and who had become a ranker in just 3 years. Thanks to this, South Korea now had 37 rankers and firmly held second place in the world after the United States. Wasn't that impressive? What was particularly striking was that this man had reached such a level in record time, not counting the first hunters, which confirmed the incredible power of necromancy. South Korea was proud that a powerful necromancer had appeared among its rankers who could compete with the best fighters in the world. Dan Hong, upon hearing this news, did not share in the general joy and only became more irritated by the injustice of fate. After all, this renowned necromancer had received his power on the same day as him, but had managed to reach incredible heights. One of them turned out to be a cursed necromancer, doomed to summon only weak skeletons, while the other was already at the top, like a true ranker. Dan Hong couldn't understand how this was possible, and anger at the injustice of this world boiled inside him. However, when the first burst of rage subsided a little, he forced himself to move on without dwelling on these thoughts. He began to realize that perhaps the limits of power were not so fixed, and that much depended on perseverance. Even if his abilities were limited, that was no reason to sit idly by and complain about his fate without trying to change the situation. With this thought in mind, he decided to intensify his training. So he summoned his skeletons, ordering them all to appear. Skill activated. Skeleton Summon, E rank. Spends up to 10 energy units to summon a normal skeleton, with a maximum of 10 warriors. The second effect of the skill allowed him to give each skeleton its own name. And this fact greatly surprised him, because he had never seen anything like it before. It seemed like a small thing, but suddenly it was a feature that set his power apart from the rest. Although, to be honest, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he was probably just entertaining himself with empty hopes. After successfully summoning them, he greeted his skeletons and even jokingly ordered them to warm up properly so as not to strain their tendons. The skeletons obediently complied with his request, and he realized that no matter how many times he summoned them, they were always the same fighters. The first of his subordinates wielded a massive sword, with which he fought with superhuman tenacity. The second used a long spear in battle, which allowed him to keep his opponents at a distance. And the third skeleton, unlike the first two, specialized in long-range combat, and always carried a reliable bow with him. Looking at his small army, Dan Hong ordered them to train hard and spare no effort. He himself sat down on the ground, lost in thought about how much effort he had already put into training, but still found himself at the very beginning of the road. To his surprise, Dan Hong noticed that his training had indeed begun to bear fruit. The skeletons, which had previously struggled to defeat even a single goblin, could now fight 3 at once, even though their rank remained unchanged. No matter how hard he tried to temper them, even if he hired an S-rank martial arts master for them, their strength would not increase 1 iota. These thoughts led him back to the sad realization that his path as a necromancer was one of constant disappointment. However, he couldn't change anything, and some people said things that only made it worse. Someone once said that living without a dream is much worse than keeping a dream in your heart that you can never fulfill. As Dan Hong sank into his dark thoughts, something watched him from the shadows, ready to interrupt his self-reflection. Alone with his skeletons, he suddenly heard a strange noise and instinctively turned his head toward the forest. What he saw made his heart sink with horror, for he certainly did not expect to encounter such an enemy here. Right in front of him stood an orc in full battle gear, coldly eyeing the human who had crossed his path. Dan Hong turned pale, trying to figure out what the hell this monster was doing in a place where it shouldn't be. To top it all off, the system immediately notified him that all his skeletons were overwhelmed by the enemy's powerful presence, and their parameters were reduced by 20%. The guy gritted his teeth, realizing how pathetic and useless they had become compared to this monster. And the very fact that an orc had appeared here could only mean one thing. There had been a dungeon breach. A dungeon breach is a catastrophic event when weakened barriers no longer hold back monsters, and they break out into the human world. The orc, noticing its prey, rushed into the attack without hesitation, and Dan Hong, caught off guard, realized that he couldn't even die here. In a panic, he shouted an order to his skeletons to block the attack, and they immediately rushed to carry out the command. The orc froze for a moment, glancing at the unexpected barrier, but his surprise did not last long. Feeling irritated that his first blow had missed its target, he growled with rage and easily threw the skeletons aside. At that moment, the system mercilessly informed the hero that both of his summoned fighters had been destroyed, and now he was left alone with the orc. The orc, noticing the man, showed unexpected interest in him, and without a moment's hesitation, rushed after him like a predator, sensing easy prey. However, the monster suddenly roared in pain. An arrow shot by skeleton number 3, who turned out to be a skilled archer, had pierced his back. Ju, looking hopefully at his lifeless ally, realized that despite all the difficulties, he was still desperately clinging to life. He glanced at the system and realized that he only had 70 energy points left, which meant he could summon no more than 7 skeletons. Without hesitation, he spent another 20 units to summon the first and second skeletons, increasing his army. He ordered the first ones to act as a shield, taking the blows, and told the archer not to stop firing. The orc, unwilling to listen to any strategies, rushed forward, seeking to tear the nearest skeletons to pieces. Ju quickly realized that the situation was becoming critical. He summoned new fighters, retreated, and then repeated the cycle again. As time passed, he completely lost track of the minutes, as the endless battle merged into one continuous fight for him. Suddenly, the system notified him that all energy had been depleted, and the only way to restore it was to rest, which was simply impossible at the moment. Ju was well aware that in this situation, there could be no respite, otherwise he would simply be torn to pieces. Using the last of his energy, he summoned 3 more skeletons, hoping that would be enough. However, the orc, still furious, continued his attack, preparing to destroy the newly appeared dead with a single blow. The main character had already resigned himself to inevitable death, but suddenly the system interface flashed a strange color and reported that a mysterious condition had been met. The guy struggled to remember that a similar notification had appeared earlier, but in the heat of battle, he hadn't had time to check it. When he finally did so, the system solemnly announced that he had fulfilled a hidden condition and received the unique ability of a cursed necromancer. It turned out that to activate it, he had to summon a regular E-rank skeleton 10,000 times, which he had already done long ago. As a result, his rank was raised to D, opening up completely new opportunities for him. The rewards for the rank increase were already being prepared for shipment, but Ju, unable to contain his emotions, mentally begged the system to give him something right now. At the very moment when the orc was about to deliver a fatal blow, the system unexpectedly announced that his energy had been fully restored. Moreover, his old E-rank skeleton summoning skill was transformed into a D-rank skeleton summoning skill, making his subordinates much stronger. This became immediately apparent when the first skeleton summoned easily parried the orc's blow, and Ju felt the restored energy surging through his body. Inspired by this, he decided to test his new power and used one of his newly acquired skills. With new confidence, he spent another 20 energy points, summoning the 4th and 5th skeletons, strengthening his army. Additionally, he used the system's capabilities to immediately equip the new recruits with suitable weapons, preparing them for the upcoming battle. Ju noted with surprise that the new skeletons not only appeared in battle, but also received weapons, even though one of them was a tank and the other a mage. Combining them with the boneheads, from the 1st to the 3rd, as he dubbed them, he realized that he now had a balanced combat group under his command. Without wasting any time, the skeleton tank with a massive shield rushed to the aid of its allies, ready to take the blow. The orc, seeing reinforcements in the ranks of his enemies, roared with rage, realizing that the battle was taking an unexpected turn. In his anger, he decided to test the strength of the newcomer's shield by unleashing the full force of his attack. However, to his shock, the sturdy protective equipment proved to be stronger than his own axe, which flew out of his hands with force and flew away. Before he could comprehend what was happening, a bright flash illuminated the space directly above his head. Looking up, the orc saw with horror that a flaming fireball was hovering above him, ready to crash down at any moment. This powerful attack was created by skeleton number 5, who turned out to be a mage and activated the first-level skill, Fireball. Inspired by their wizard's example, the other skeletons rushed into the attack, intensifying the pressure on the enemy. Under a hail of blows, the orc could not withstand the attack and collapsed to the ground, and Ju realized with amazement that they had indeed won. Soon, the system confirmed this, reporting that he had managed to defeat a strong opponent. The main character could hardly believe what had happened, because just a moment ago he was sure he was doomed. However, reality turned out to be different. They had destroyed a formidable enemy, which meant that even greater battles awaited him ahead. At that moment, he realized that the world was not going to get rid of him so soon, which meant that he could move on. A short time later, he was sitting peacefully at home, enjoying a bowl of hot ramen. Glancing at the system, he was surprised to find that his Summon Normal Skeleton skill had now reached rank D. He had no idea that his abilities could develop, even though he was limited in his choice of summoned creatures. Nevertheless, he was quite satisfied with this, because all his efforts would eventually pay off. Of course, he didn't know yet when he would be able to reach at least rank C, but he was already satisfied with his current progress. Therefore, he decided that it was time to go back to basics and see how far he could go. The power of the intermediate skeletons was already impressive, and Ju wondered what they would become if they could develop even further. For example, he imagined Bone Number 5 mastering powerful spells and beginning to shower enemies with an icy blizzard. Or maybe the 1st and 2nd would become masters of the sword and spear, capable of crushing any opponent. Instead of just thinking about it, he decided to take action. It was time to make these ideas a reality. Returning to work, Ju accidentally overheard a conversation in which they discussed that the upcoming job could be quite troublesome, because in addition to the insurance premium, the risk fee would have to be exorbitantly high. Someone noted that the amount of remuneration was 10 times higher than usual, and jokingly added that with such a payment, even he would volunteer to be a porter in order to gain valuable experience. Ju didn't immediately understand what they were talking about, but his attention was drawn to the green badge. It meant that he was looking at a C-rank hunter, and he couldn't understand what such a high-ranking person was doing here. Suddenly, someone addressed Donhun, slightly startling him with their unexpected appearance. The man asked him to come over, saying he had important news, and upon hearing this, Ju immediately became alert, curious about what information required his attention so urgently. The chief executive asked him with an important look whether he was familiar with the Parang Guild, the very one founded by the legendary hunter Giparang. Ju answered affirmatively without hesitation, because in his opinion, there was not a single person in Korea who did not know this prestigious organization, created by the famous Rantier Giparang, known by the nickname Beautiful Bo. His interlocutor said that the guild was planning to explore a new dungeon and was looking for porters, offering very generous pay for the job. By generously, he meant an amount 10 times the standard pay, which sounded simply unbelievable. Hearing this, Ju almost choked in surprise, because he couldn't even imagine that the rate could be so high. The man confirmed that the information was reliable because the guild even accepts E-rank hunters, and all other offers are just trash in comparison. Ju thought for a moment, and then replied that he would like to study the information about the dungeon itself in more detail first. The employee explained that it was a recently opened dungeon, and it had already proven to be a very difficult challenge. It turned out that 5 teams had attempted to complete it, but none of them had succeeded, which immediately alerted Ju. In addition, it was announced that the rank of the dungeon had not yet been determined, and this was probably the reason for all the failures. All previous groups that went to explore consisted of newbies, but now the situation will change with the intervention of the famous Parang Guild. Given their level, it seemed that everything should go smoothly now, because Ju, being just a porter, would not even have to fight monsters. In fact, his task was simply to do his job and get paid for it. It sounded pretty simple. However, something inside him told him that there was a catch, and this catch intrigued him immensely. Apparently, the tenfold reward was not generosity, but a kind of compensation for the high risk in this mysterious dungeon. To be honest with himself, after yesterday's skirmish with the orc, he was mentally exhausted and needed rest. But even despite his fatigue, the offer sounded damn tempting because, as the Dark Lord himself said in his interview, if someone wants to rapidly increase their rank, they need to go to dungeons above their level, because there is simply no other way. Of course, as your rank increases, so do the risks. But with that come new opportunities and more valuable rewards. After weighing the pros and cons, Ju firmly stated that he accepted the offer, to which his boss smiled broadly and praised him for making the right decision, because such opportunities cannot be missed. Ju asked when exactly they were leaving, to which his interlocutor replied that it would be in a week from Paju Station. Hearing this, the young man said that in that case, he would take a week's vacation to prepare. The man supported his decision, thanked him for his participation, and even offered to treat him to a meal as a token of his appreciation. After a while, Ju used his necromancy again and summoned 5 skeletons, rejoicing at how far he had come. He couldn't help but notice how different his current situation was from the past. His training had finally paid off. If he continued to develop in the same vein, the skeletons would become even stronger, and that in turn could lead to him one day achieving the rank of Ranker himself. After thinking for a moment, he ordered his subordinates to take up their positions, wanting to test the capabilities of the D-rank skeleton. And now the swordsman, who had previously struggled to deal with goblins, easily cut through a massive wooden log. His comrade with a spear was not far behind. He pierced a wooden board as if it were made of paper. However, skeleton number 3 was the most impressive, piercing several trees at once with a single shot from his bow. Seeing the success of his subordinates, Ju couldn't help but be surprised. Their strength had indeed increased, and they were already almost reaching the next rank. Of course, he understood that they had not become omnipotent, but he did not expect such significant progress. Now he had to change the training equipment, because wooden dummies were no longer a challenge for them. However, this fact gave him mixed feelings, because it meant that he would have to spend even more money on new equipment. But at the same time, there was no need to be upset. The main thing was that the skeletons had become stronger. The real problem lay with him. What could he do if the enemy suddenly decided to attack him instead of the skeletons? In that case, it wouldn't matter how strong his subordinates were if he himself was defeated. Suddenly, something strange appeared before Ju. He noticed that the skeleton wizard was heading toward him, holding a spear in his hands. It came closer and suddenly pointed the weapon in his direction. Ju froze, not understanding what was happening, and even tensed up slightly, becoming alert. However, A moment later, the magical attribute was in his hands, which surprised him even more. He couldn't understand what had just happened. Had his subordinate read his thoughts? Deciding to test his guess, he mentally asked the skeleton if it really understood what he was thinking. And suddenly, not only did the skeleton answer, but all the others did too. It was amazing. Before, they had only followed orders, but now they could express their own opinions. The hero wondered if this air shield was another skill that complemented his fireball. While he was thinking, one of his subordinates stepped forward and struck the ground hard with his shield, raising a cloud of dust. Ju instantly turned around, trying to understand what had happened. The skeleton tank silently pointed to the wooden mannequins smashed to pieces, drawing the hero's attention. The necromancer did not immediately understand the hint, and pondered the possible meaning of the gesture. Soon, the skeletons began fighting each other, turning the training ground into a chaotic mess of movement. The tank fought several opponents at once, while arrows flew from above. However, he easily used his shield to deflect all blows without losing his balance. The hero watched what was happening, amazed at the power of his subordinate. Realizing that the tank could help with training, he decided that additional equipment might no longer be necessary. Then he turned his attention to the second skeleton and ordered it to attack. Ju wanted to test the air shield, as it was a basic skill for first-level wizards. The spear rapidly approached his face, causing him to instinctively close his eyes, but the protection worked. He realized that this skill was indeed effective and felt satisfied. Convinced of this, he informed his subordinates that the training would continue. Engaging in combat with a skeleton swordsman, he began to practice close combat. Soon, a notification appeared, informing him that the skeleton's strength had increased by 1 point. This surprised the hero even more, especially when the system unlocked the status window. It contained information about the skills, characteristics, and abilities of his subordinates. The hero assumed that if this feature was available to the first number, it would soon appear for the rest. His guess was correct, and in a moment, the entire army gained access to statuses. Analysis of the data showed that the indicators of the first 3 skeletons differed significantly from the characteristics of the rest. This result confirmed that the training had borne fruit and had not been in vain. Now, it was time to develop their skills to unlock their potential. Ju decided to make his skeletons the strongest creatures in the world. After a while, the hero found himself at the appointed place, looking around in anticipation of the start of the operation. He changed his clothes, carefully preparing all the necessary equipment for the upcoming test. Taking a bag and a generous supply of food, he prudently took care of possible unforeseen situations. Aware of his role as an ordinary porter, he decided to do everything perfectly, because the mercenaries might urgently need supplies. One of the fighters called him over, reminding him to follow the instructions, as the group was about to enter the dungeon together. Ju noticed that the dungeon was located near Paju Station and was surrounded by a faint but noticeable energy aura. The entrance to the dungeon resembled a natural cave, but it concealed something more sinister and dangerous. There was a palpable tension among the assembled people, indicating the high level of difficulty of this place. Someone mentioned that the more saturated the color of the aura at the entrance, the more dangerous the interior space. Despite their fears, some talked about the imminent completion of the task and dreamed of enjoying hot soup with soju as soon as possible. Ju was amazed at their carelessness. Were they really so confident in their safety just because they belonged to a large guild? The thought of such a reckless approach seemed absurd to him, and even slightly annoyed him. In this world there were countless dungeons, and with them, thousands of hunters who had disappeared forever. A huge number of victims and tragedies remained in the shadow of the glory of powerful rankers. However, the hero was not going to back down and made a firm decision to see this path through to the end. He knew he was putting his life on the line, but he was willing to take the risk for the sake of his future. Suddenly, he heard a woman's voice unexpectedly addressing him with an apology. Turning toward the sound, he looked around in surprise, but saw no one nearby. The stranger continued to speak, mentioning that she sensed D-level energy in him, even though the plate indicated rank E. Her words intrigued the hero, making him wonder what the reason for this discrepancy was. Besides, since he was just a porter, it became even more interesting to find out who this mysterious guy really was. The hero was quite surprised and, apologizing awkwardly, asked a counter-question about the stranger's identity. The girl reminded him in surprise that she had asked the first question and asked why he had hidden Parang's abilities and agreed to the role of an ordinary porter. The hero realized that there seemed to be a misunderstanding, but was amazed at how she managed to notice such insignificant details. However, considering that their guild had plenty of A-rank hunters, what difference did it make who he was? The girl did not let up, studying his face intently, and suspected that he might be a spy trained in acting. She noticed that he was too careless about Parang's intelligence capabilities, and probably did not expect his identity to be revealed so quickly. After these pompous words, The stranger finally stepped out of the shadows, and the hero was able to see her. However, what he saw stunned him even more, because the gold plate on her belt indicated a rank of S, or even higher. This could only mean one thing. Standing before him was the first among South Korea's 37 rankers, the legendary Dark Empress Gi Soyul, the head of the Parang Guild and the only younger sister of Gi Parang, famous for her unique ability to kill. She was someone better not to provoke. The hero didn't even have time to realize how dangerous she was, but her piercing gaze made him nervous. The thought that he had the chance to personally communicate with the ranker he had always admired seemed almost unreal. Wanting to defuse the situation, he tried to explain that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. He was not a spy, but merely a D-rank hunter. And besides, if a rival guild was interested in Parang, it must have enormous influence. In that case, it was unclear why they would send a weak hunter like him. There was a moment of silence between them, and then the girl suddenly smiled and admitted that she was just joking. The hero was confused, realizing that he had taken her words seriously. He watched her, wondering why a ranker of her level would play such pranks. Meanwhile, those around them began to discuss why the Dark Empress Gi Soyul had suddenly appeared in this place. Ju just hoped that she wasn't trying to find out about him, because that would seem very strange. Of course, his training with skeletons could have attracted the attention of some rankers, but in any case, he had been given an opportunity by fate itself to gain the interest of such an influential person. The girl noticed with a slight smile that he was clearly nervous about her unexpected behavior. Then she apologized for her harshness, which puzzled the hero even more. Her conversation partner noted with curiosity that an ordinary porter with an E rank was somehow able to contain 5 D rank energies at once. Ju didn't know how to respond, because he understood perfectly well that her observation was absolutely accurate. However, this meant only one thing: she was able to recognize his power thanks to her ability to detect energy. Soyul explained that her older brother had instructed her to join the second team's expedition as a scout, and she was looking for a suitable porter. At that moment, he appeared. A very suspicious porter who immediately caught her attention. After a brief explanation about the reconnaissance mission, she unexpectedly offered him to join voluntarily, warning him that it might be a little dangerous. With his skill set, he clearly surpasses all the other porters in terms of ability. However, he did not give the impression of someone who would be frightened and simply run away. Ju tensed up and cautiously asked if she really thought so. Putting her hand on his shoulder, the girl smiled and said that her intuition about people had never failed her. And to make the offer even more tempting, she added that she was ready to double his reward. The hero realized that he had hit the jackpot. Participation in an expedition with a ranker, and with double the reward. So when she asked if he agreed, he didn't even hesitate and immediately accepted the offer. After all, such an opportunity was simply too good to pass up. When it comes to dungeon ranks, their difficulty varies from the lowest E to the highest S. These levels are not set by the system, so people had to assess the danger and rank the dungeons themselves. The ranker White Shadow once said that if someone wants to know the rank of a dungeon in advance, unfortunately, there is no way to do so. It can only be determined after entering. The only thing you can use as a guide is the brightness of the light around the portal. The darker it is, the more difficult the dungeon may be. However, even this method was inaccurate, so the association established a rule. If more than 5 hunters of the same rank cannot pass through the dungeon, its level is raised. For example, if 5 A-rank hunters are sent there but fail to clear it, then the dungeon automatically receives an S level. This method was far from perfect, but there was simply no other way except to sacrifice hunters. The dungeon the hero was about to enter had no official rank and fit this description. However, instead of immediately sending the best fighters there, they first decided to check it out with a reconnaissance team. It was thanks to this that Ju sensed the presence of the dungeon faster than the other mercenaries. Very soon, the system notified him that he was about to enter the dungeon. Once inside, Ju noticed that thanks to the luminescent pearls, the lighting here was quite good, so they would have no problems with visibility. One of the group members jokingly remarked that if they could sell these pearls, they could make a good amount of money. But he was immediately reminded that there had been cases where people had died just by touching the artifacts in the dungeon. Listening to this conversation, Ju realized that his companions had relaxed, which was not surprising. After all, with the exception of Gi Soyul, who had an S rank, everyone else was an A rank hunter. The leader of the reconnaissance group immediately urged everyone to remain vigilant and prepare for exploration. First, Swiftblade and Little Fire were to survey the surroundings, which they agreed to without hesitation. Then the girl turned to guide Kang Sun-wook, and he immediately asked what exactly was required of him. In response, she instructed him to find a way out and not to forget to cover the porter. The man just smiled, noting that he had already anticipated such a request. Soyul asked with interest if this was true, to which he confidently replied that it could not be otherwise. Ju thought about it, because this man had a rather unusual nickname, Guide, which the system had given him for his unique ability to find his way in the most complex dungeons. The girl noted that now that everything had been assigned, it was time to set off. Guide turned to the porter with an unexpected question, asking if he was nervous, to which Ju hesitated a little, and then admitted that it would be a lie to deny it. The man looked at him intently and advised him not to lose that feeling. He explained that there were too many suspicious moments in this dungeon to behave carelessly. In his opinion, if even the Dark Empress remained cautious, then the rest should not relax either. The atmosphere seemed too calm, the structure of the cave too simple, and therefore the probability of monsters appearing was extremely low. After all, if someone lived here, there should be at least a slight echo of footsteps, the sound of breathing, or barely noticeable vibrations. And since nothing like that could be felt, it meant that something else was most likely hiding here. Ju asked in surprise if he could really say that without even starting a full-fledged exploration, to which the guide replied without a shadow of a doubt, because he had been studying the underground for many years. Then he suggested that Ju follow him while they searched for the exit, as required by the order. The hero agreed without objection, although he noticed that their route deviated from the path taken by the other hunters, but decided that everything should be fine. They moved forward when suddenly the man unexpectedly admitted that he felt uneasy. Ju became alert, while Gid continued to think aloud that there were no traps or even hints of clues in this place. Then the guide asked Ju if he felt heaviness in his body, or if it was just him. Ju admitted that he had goosebumps, and wasn't sure if they should continue on their way. Guide nodded, agreeing that he also felt a strange sensation that he had never experienced before. Even meeting a ranger didn't cause him such anxiety. It was as if something absurd awaited them ahead, something beyond the realm of ordinary monsters. Remembering that Ju had recently mentioned his necromantic abilities, Gid suggested that he summon the undead, so that, in case of danger, he would have at least some chance of salvation. Without a moment's hesitation, Ju grabbed his staff and activated necromancy. As usual, 5 skeletons appeared before him. However, summoning the creatures consumed 50 energy points out of the 100 available. The guide glanced at the skeletons appraisingly and asked in surprise if he had anything stronger. Ju replied irritably that this was all he had. At that moment, a strange sound alerted them both, and then a crushing, overwhelming force suddenly rolled in. Ju didn't understand what was happening, and immediately turned to the guide with a question. The man shouted sharply for him to keep going forward, because there was open terrain ahead. Ju asked in confusion what difference it made if they couldn't get there. Sunwook shouted that he didn't know for sure, but he sensed the presence of several creatures, which meant that there was an area suitable for life ahead. Perhaps there were previous teams or monsters there, but in any case, they needed to keep moving. The humans and skeletons rushed forward despite the looming threat. Ju felt that the situation was becoming critical. The pressure was so strong that he could barely keep his eyes open or even breathe. The force was so powerful that even moving became incredibly difficult. The skeleton wizard, noticing that his master was in trouble, used the first-level skill, Air Shield. However, literally a moment later, the system reported that the shield had been shattered to pieces. The pressure became unbearable. Ju couldn't take it anymore and blood gushed from his mouth. He immediately turned to the skeleton under number 1, hoping that it could help. Ju realized that the force acting on them was so great that it could destroy defensive skills the moment they were activated. Nevertheless, the guide somehow managed to advance much further, which was astonishing. Suddenly, alarming thoughts swirled in his head. Was it worth getting involved in this adventure at all? If the dungeon recently discovered in Paju turned out to be a trap of super high difficulty? Even for rankers, this place would be a serious challenge, and he, an ordinary guy, just wanted to live, not play deadly games. To reach the highest level among hunters, he would first have to stay alive, and only then think about great deeds. Suddenly, the space around them shook strangely, and the system announced that he had entered a certain zone, and had now reached the stage of an elderly man with snow-white hair, radiating icy resentment. Ju was taken aback. What nonsense! Since when did the system allow such absurd formulations? And what did elderly man with resentment even mean? He reread the system message and realized that it was not about him, but about an enemy whose resentment was so deep that even his hair was covered with icy frost. So, the only way forward was to enter the hall and defeat the old man whose anger froze the air around him. Now everything fell into place. This mysterious white-haired man was none other than the dungeon boss, and a serious test awaited him ahead. While Ju pondered, torn between doubt and determination, his attention was drawn to a strange voice coming from a dark corner. It turned out to be the long-lost hunters, and they asked with undisguised joy if the rescue team had finally arrived. The main character frowned, realizing that these people were probably trying to escape a deadly trap but were stuck here in despair. However, when they saw the purple badge on the guide, they suddenly froze in awe, realizing that they were in the presence of a high-ranking hunter. On top of that, ancient skeletons were scattered everywhere, which meant that a necromancer could be hiding somewhere nearby. And then the situation would become even more dangerous. The hunters begged for help, asking for at least a little food and water, because thirst and hunger were slowly killing them even faster than the dungeon itself. Then the man, who remained calm amid the general chaos, nodded and ordered that food be distributed first. The dead do not eat, but the living can still escape. Ju felt a strange sense of guilt. He had run away to save himself while these people had stayed here, prisoners of their own fear. However, he quickly dismissed his doubts, reminding himself that this was the reality of the dungeons. Only those who acted first survived. Soon, the surviving hunters received food and eagerly pounced on it, like animals finally freed from their hungry captivity. Watching them gulp down their food, Ju thought with grim certainty that just one wrong decision and he could have been in their place. The tracker, noticing their unbridled haste, frowned and advised them to eat more slowly, so as not to harm themselves even more. Then he asked the key question. Could they explain what had actually happened in this place, and what the nature of the dungeon was? One of the hunters, who seemed the most composed, stood up and said he would speak on behalf of their entire surviving group. As it turned out, he was a B-rank hunter, which meant he was the strongest among those who had managed to stay alive. According to him, this dungeon was not just difficult, it was a real curse, because in all his years of hunting, he had never encountered anything like it. His interlocutor was surprised and asked what made this place so strange, and in response, the hunter just smiled grimly and spread his arms. Just look for yourself. There is no way out. It can be said that no matter which way they go from the very beginning, this cursed cave will lead them to this door. It was probably the key that would open the way to the boss of this sinister dungeon. The people stuck here were enveloped in a strange aura that prevented them from even approaching the exit. Ultimately, they had only one option left, to take a risk and challenge whatever was hidden behind the massive door. However, the difficulty of the trial was so insane that it seemed impossible for anyone in their right mind to overcome it. The legendary old man with gray hair, steeped in resentment, was like a living curse, and none of those who faced him could defeat him. For low or even mid-rank hunters, this battle was like a baby trying to defeat an ancient dragon. However, if an A-rank hunter faced him, the outcome could be completely different. So one of the men asked Geed with hope whether he could pull them out of this nightmare. In response, the guide just stared at him intently, but didn't say a word, leaving them in tense anticipation. The group of survivors asked for a moment to think. If the boss was really as strong as they said, how had they managed to stay alive? The interlocutor nodded thoughtfully and replied that this was indeed an interesting question, because oddly enough, the old man never kills anyone. Instead, he seemed to be conducting some kind of selection process, putting everyone to the test, which immediately intrigued Ju. One of the survivors confirmed that no one knew the exact details, because they were simply beaten half to death. Then the old man just clicked his tongue contemptuously, muttering, "This one's no good," and continued his strange ritual. And the most unexpected thing was that after that, he simply threw them back out, without even trying to finish them off. Ju was shocked again. Could there really be a boss who didn't kill? And what kind of dungeon was this? The hunter, speaking on behalf of the group, thoughtfully added that perhaps the answer lay in the old man himself. After all, he was still human. This was the first time that the dungeon boss was not a monster or a demon, but an ordinary mortal, albeit one with frightening power. This fact was unsettling, and Ju couldn't shake the question. How was this even possible? Be that as it may, they had to open this door and complete the trial if they wanted to find a way out. However, he was in no hurry to trust Kang Sung-wook, because he was a hunter specializing in guiding, which meant he could be hiding something important. Now he faced a major dilemma: how to proceed and who to trust in this situation. But before he could come to any conclusion, his thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Soyul, who had arrived here with Hwajong. The situation was quickly explained to the girl, and after hearing everything, she nodded silently, quickly assessing the situation. Then, gathering her thoughts, Soyul confidently stated that they should go in right now, because judging by their auras, the survivors were neither doubles nor an illusory trap. Soyul was concerned about the powerful aura enveloping this place, but sitting idly by was simply unacceptable. Hearing her confident words, the survivors breathed a sigh of relief, because now their salvation was almost guaranteed. After all, they were facing a hunter from the Perang Guild. The Dark Empress merely nodded and ordered the porter and the survivors to stay here while she dealt with the dungeon. Ju thought to himself. The difference between ranks S and A seemed simply enormous, as if there was an impassable chasm between them. Moreover, Soy Yul was among the 1,000 best rankers in the world, and that spoke for itself. The girl didn't waste time talking and ordered everyone to get ready, as they were going inside immediately. With these words, she confidently opened the massive door, behind which lay something unknown. A short time passed, and Ju, as usual, sat waiting for the results, hoping for the strength of the high-ranking hunters. But suddenly the silence was broken by strange cries coming from behind the door. As it turned out, several hunters who had entered with Soy Yul were simply thrown out of the boss's room like useless ragdolls. But the most shocking thing was that the girl herself soon followed them, flying out with a crash. Her wounded body and tattered clothes made it clear that the fight had been much more brutal than anyone could have imagined. Joe, watching this chaos, was stunned and couldn't understand what the hell was going on. If he understood correctly, less than 10 minutes had passed since they entered, and they had already been taken out. It was simply impossible to believe that an S-Class ranker had been defeated so quickly and thrown aside as if he were nothing more than an insignificant obstacle. The Dark Empress was boiling with rage, unable to accept that she too was unsuitable for the boss, and in her fury, she turned to the porter. Ju flinched slightly at her sharp tone, but immediately asked what exactly was required of him. Without hesitation, she ordered him to get the highest level potion from his bag, for she had no intention of giving up. The guy was taken aback. Was she really going back there after being beaten so badly? Handing her the bottle of elixir, he couldn't help asking if she was sure about her actions, to which Soil calmly replied, "The survivors were telling the truth. The old man doesn't kill. He just beats people up." These words only increased his confusion, but the girl added that now, on the contrary, she was full of determination. "If I go to him again, he must let me know whether I am suitable for him or not," she said with sincere conviction. Ju frowned. The term suitable was more reminiscent of an expression used by masters when looking for a worthy student. In that case, perhaps the reason for the old man's dissatisfaction was that he simply had not found a worthy talent among the applicants. Without hesitation, Soil drank the potion in one gulp, her wounds began to heal, and without turning back, she stepped back into the darkness of her boss's room. It was at this moment that an endless ordeal began for Guy Soil, turning into a real nightmare. Time after time, she entered the boss's room and then returned beaten, as if she had been sent to endless, brutal training. Once again, barely catching her breath, the girl exploded with rage and shouted that it was driving her crazy. What kind of crazy whim did this old man have? What else did he want from her? This stubborn old man turned out to be not only a master swordsman, but also an excellent spearman, which only added fuel to the fire. But now, she swore, the moment had come to find out who would emerge victorious this time. Ju, watching this absurdity, was skeptical of her persistence. But day turned into night, and everything remained the same. One day, 2, 3, 4, Guy Soil did not stop, challenging the invincible old man again and again. It seemed that she had long since exhausted her abilities, but each time she got up and walked back, amazed that this monster also possessed magic. Now it was finally clear. No one here knew how to deal with him. Ju realized that the situation was out of control. Even if Guy Parang showed up with a whole squad now, it would be almost impossible to defeat the boss. He had an uneasy feeling that even 5 high-level rankers would not be able to defeat this old man. Finally, even the Dark Empress admitted that the enemy was unimaginably strong. But as long as she was alive, she would not stop challenging him. The hero was struck by her steadfastness. It was not just stubbornness, but a determination worthy of a true high-level ranker. However, unrest was already beginning among the survivors, because no one could cope with the dungeon, and the weight was becoming unbearable. It seemed that even Ju himself felt some strange annoyance, even though he had no intention of participating in this battle. Perhaps that was why he couldn't just sit on the sidelines with his arms folded. He imagined how all the hunters here had already passed through that door and returned beaten and broken. But that's not the right way to put it, because everyone except Ju had gone through. And so, having made his final decision, he got up and confidently headed for the boss's door. Guy Soil noticed his movement and, puzzled, asked what he was going to do. Ju calmly but firmly replied that he thought he should try too. So Yul froze in surprise for a moment, not believing her ears, and asked if she had heard correctly. Was the porter really going to enter the dungeon where even the rankers were powerless? The hunter nicknamed Swiftblade intervened. She was sure that this guy was just a novice necromancer, capable of summoning only weak skeletons, and therefore he should know his place. After all, a porter should behave like a porter. Just carry bags, not imagine himself a hero. Having said this, he immediately touched his sword. The main character saw this and realized that the situation was not turning out as he had imagined. Suddenly, the Dark Empress asked him to wait, wondering if he wanted to do this because he didn't trust her. Ju realized that he had been misunderstood and said that was not the case. The girl stated that, according to the original contract, he was a porter and could not express his opinion about exploring the dungeon. The hero replied that he knew that very well, and his interlocutor asked if she could inquire why he wanted to dispute it. The guy said that, based on what he had heard, the old man had said he was looking for the right person. He thought that the old man's dissatisfaction might be related to his search for a worthy apprentice. A worthy disciple must have potential. He does not necessarily have to be perfect. In other words, it is not about the current level of skill. Sui Yul noticed that he was now saying that he wanted to make the old man his teacher, not defeat him. The guy added that this could be the hidden condition. Speaking of hidden conditions, sometimes there are alternative ways to pass through dungeons. The Dark Empress noticed that he was lying. But how was he going to become his student? Does he really mean to say that he has more potential than she does? Looking at this girl's subordinate, the hero realized that things were getting more and more tense. That's why he said he really doubted that was possible. Then his interlocutor came closer to him and said that he had not denied it. Trying to justify himself, Ju said that she had misunderstood. He was only talking about the pain that everyone else was experiencing except him, and he felt like he was out of place here. He also asked if she was on a break. Sui Yul smiled at first, then said that now he had shown his true colors. She, in turn, knew this from the very beginning, and had said earlier that he was suspicious. After all, in her opinion, his eyes were like those of a wolf on the hunt. So, does he really want to get the dungeon reward and hope for a lucky encounter during the raid? Thinking about it, the main character decided that she must be a fortune teller, not a ranker. It was completely unclear how she could read a person so quickly, just by looking at them. Well, his interlocutor continued to speak. If she thinks so, then let someone else try. There is no other solution anyway, and she wanted to rest. As he said, that was the case, so she was fine with everything. Besides, she wasn't the type to gossip, and in the end, she had also failed. Ju asked if she really allowed him to do it, and the girl answered affirmatively, but noted that he only had one chance. How could he see their rations running out, and the rescuers were all coming, which meant they needed to deal with all this as soon as possible. The main character thanked her politely and said he understood. Then he firmly decided that he was going to challenge the boss and approached his door. After that, the system informed him that he could challenge the scene by opening the door and asked if he really wanted to do so. The hero immediately opened the door and saw an elderly man with gray hair and a look of deep resentment on his face. His gaze, in turn, was so deep that ice formed in his hair, and after he was told to defeat the old man, a bright light spread throughout the room. The old man, who had been standing there a few moments earlier, simply disappeared. The hero was surprised and could not understand where he had gone. A few seconds later, he felt a pressure that immediately brought him to his knees. After that, the boss appeared and asked what was going on. First a frail girl came, and now an even more pathetic guy. It wasn't even worth looking at, so he just had to get rid of him. In the old man's eyes, the hero saw a bright flash that seemed to look into his soul, and he felt a very strong opponent in front of him, as well as his onslaught. Suddenly, the system turned gold and reported that he was facing the memories of a cursed soul. The hidden condition was achieved. This was the hidden condition for the unique ability, the Cursed Necromancer, the encounter with the memory of the cursed soul. The Necromancer ultimately commands the dead, so let him face the cursed soul with strong determination, followed by a congratulation that the hidden skill has been unlocked. And the guy got the S-rank memory restoration skill, which surprised him greatly, thinking he was asleep. A few seconds later, the system said that he was using this memory restoration skill. The hero didn't understand how he was using it, but when he thought about it, the old man said to get rid of it. But he wasn't doing anything. At that moment, the memory of the cursed soul of the master of all techniques was recreated, and soon, the guy would be transported. When this message appeared, the light intensified even more, and Ju couldn't see. Very soon, he found himself on the summit of a snow-covered mountain. The boss of this dungeon was also there at the top of the mountain. He asked why there were no suitable candidates, but it was too wasteful to leave like that. What a meaningless life. He had worked so hard to get where he was now, and now he was being asked to give it all up. After looking around a bit, the guy realized that this was a completely different world. He became curious about the area and wondered if they really existed. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation, perhaps the emotions and memories of the old man. He, in turn, continued to talk. After all, it had been quite an interesting life. A swordsman, spearman, assassin, archer, mage, buffer, healer, and much more. When a person knows how to control the flow of qi, all techniques become one. The old man who had overcome everything and everyone lived a very long life, but even Qi could not stop his aging. He said that now drinking cold water was like drinking poison, and the air, which had once been light, seemed to weigh down on him, wanting to kill him. It was indeed very painful and agonizing, but he couldn't just die like that. Yes, it would be too unfair to die now. He continued to say how unfortunate it was, because he just wanted to find one disciple to whom he could pass on this ability, and he couldn't understand how there could be no one with sufficient talent. The idea of a single successor was nothing more than his senseless greed. So very soon he fell to his knees and with tears in his eyes, begged that he could no longer live like this. Saying that he would sell his soul just to leave his name behind, he immediately fell to the ground. And when that happened, the system window reappeared, informing him that the memory restoration skill had ended. After that, the hero found himself back in the boss's room with him. Suddenly he realized that this place was quite familiar. Looking around, he realized that this was the boss's room, and the system informed him that the master of all techniques was watching him. Ju realized that he had returned, but he couldn't imagine how stuffy it was here. But even despite everything that was happening to him, he now had hope. The old man, in turn, said that he had looked into his soul and asked if he found it interesting. And in the system window, there was text saying that the master of all techniques was interested in him. The guy, trying to overcome the pressure that was weighing on him from all sides, said that he had looked, and he thought, if this old man is really looking for a student, someone who can inherit his enormous power and knowledge, and then he firmly decided that he should become that disciple. The boss said that, in any case, apart from being a little interesting, he had nothing else. He was worthless, and he had nothing to withstand his techniques. Saying these words, the master used his power again and applied even more pressure. The main character called him an elder and asked him not to do this, because if he continued in the same vein, he would never find himself a disciple. He would forever remain a ghost, unable to cope with his resentment, and then people would remember him as a ghost full of stubbornness. The sage became angry, calling him an insolent brat, and visited such ants on his shoulders thanks to his boundless generosity. So does he really need to break this man's leg in order for him to come to his senses? Trying to defuse the situation a little, Ju asked him not to do that and to listen to him. It turns out that the master has mastered all the techniques, while the people of this world try to master at least one in their entire lives. My interlocutor noted that this is simply impossible, because the world is huge, and there will surely be another genius like him at some point. Then the guy asked him to remember the woman who had come a little earlier, and whether he could believe that she was one of the strongest in the world. The old man was very surprised by this. Ju thought that, considering that a ranker like Gi Soyul was his ultimate goal, the old man's reaction hurt him. But in any case, looking at him now, he had definitely taken the bait. Suddenly, the sage shouted, "That's impossible! How can she be one of the strongest with such skill? Most likely, he's just trying to deceive him." The hero immediately asked him to look him in the eyes. Do they look like the eyes of a dishonest person? He knows that it is quite easy to tell if he is lying just by looking into his eyes. The old man didn't even have to look long to understand everything, and he said that he was telling the truth. But it was a pity. Then Ju added that if no one else met his standards, how about using him? His interlocutor did not quite understand what he was talking about and how to use him. The hero said that he should pass on his abilities to him, but the sage did not understand. Did he really have to take him as a student? He considered him insolent, but now he also turned out to be unscrupulous. It would be better to teach trash than him. The guy immediately said that he wasn't asking to be taught. Then he immediately reached for the system window and hoped he wasn't mistaken. Then, using his own necromantic powers, he summoned ordinary D-rank skeletons. He declared that if the old man was indeed an elder, he was sure he would be able to see their potential. The boss was very surprised when he saw the technique used in front of him, and the hero wondered if the evolving skeletons had unlimited potential. And with such potential, each of them has their own unique abilities, so it will be even easier for him to train them. And even if he wanted one heir as he thought, there was no need to worry. After all, even if they all evolve, the guy will be the only one to inherit all of this, so he asked what he thought about it. They don't feel pain, so they will have more endurance than anyone else, or be more prepared for challenges than anyone else, because they are fearless. The elder, looking closely at the skeletons, thought for a moment. Then he simply turned away and headed off in an unknown direction. The guy thought that his strategy had failed and didn't know what to do next. At that moment, the boss said that it was quite amusing and ironic that the successor he was looking for was not a human, but an undead. Their potential was truly enormous. They must have been exceptional warriors in life, and he had always wanted to have such students. It was a pity that they were now dead. On top of all this, he could say that teaching more than one would be difficult. But still, He agreed and believed that he had to make some kind of compromise. And after these words, the system reported that he had fulfilled a hidden condition for the scene with an elderly man with white hair, full of deep resentment. The elder said that he would trust his words and believe the determination in his eyes, but he needed to promise something. No matter what trials he faced, he would inherit everything he owned, and in that case, he would leave his mark somewhere in this mortal world. The system window informed him of the conditions for his recognition if he wanted to be summoned by a transcendent being from another world. A master of all techniques, he had to reach a certain level, and this condition would convince him. Ju said that he would not miss this once-in-a-lifetime chance, but would inherit everything, no matter what. The old man was delighted, and a congratulatory message appeared in the system window, stating that he had cleared the scene of an elderly man with white hair, full of deep resentment. And the next time the guy opened his eyes, he found himself in a hospital bed. As soon as he did so, he heard a woman's voice saying that he had finally woken up. The hero couldn't understand who it was, so he immediately got up and asked who was there. To his surprise, he saw Gi Soil, who was wearing a business suit. The first thought that came to his mind was whether he was really in a hospital. The girl asked him to introduce himself again. She was Gi Soil, the guildmaster of the Parang Guild. She was also better known by her pseudonym, the Dark Empress. Ju knew all this very well, but he didn't understand what she was doing in his hospital room. He didn't even remember what happened after clearing the dungeon. He must have lost consciousness. His companion said that she was really surprised, to be honest. She thought the boss was impenetrable. But who would have thought that the porter would be the one to clear it out? The tone of the conversation, in turn, did not please the young man at all and frightened him. That's why he asked her why she was looking at him like that. The girl continued to do so without saying anything, and the hero said that he was curious why the deputy guildmaster of one of the largest guilds had come to him. The Dark Empress came closer and asked if it wasn't obvious, because she was also curious. How exactly did he pass this absurd dungeon, and what reward did he receive for it? On top of all that, had he really become the old man's apprentice, and so on? Ju understood that her questions were justified. The dungeon belonged to her, and he had been given only one chance. From her point of view, he was just a random guy who stole her achievement. A more ruthless ranker might have already beheaded him for stealing his loot. The hero did not answer for a long time, so the girl asked what the porter was thinking so deeply about. Then Ju said, before answering her questions, could she tell him what the news was saying about this dungeon exploration? Soy Yul understood what he was worried about, but she didn't need to, as they reported that the Parang Guild's advance team had successfully cleared the dungeon, and they made all the survivors sign non-disclosure agreements. The hero was happy, and wondered if this meant that the public didn't know that he was the one who had cleared the dungeon. So he bowed and thanked the Dark Empress for caring for him. The girl said that he seemed more mature than he was, and that most hunters would have killed for the opportunity to boast about their achievements to the whole world. The hero said that safety was still his top priority. His companion noted that in that case there was no need to thank her, as it was also a source of pride for the Parang Guild. Would anyone believe that a porter became the main hero of the expedition, a mercenary of the E rank, and not a ranker? It became clear to Ju, so they kept it a secret because it embarrassed them. And if he revealed the truth to the whole world, they could quietly deal with him. So he turned to the girl, and she asked what he wanted. He asked how long he had been unconscious, and she replied that it had been 3 days since they left the dungeon, which meant about the same amount of time. The guy realized that this was really bad, because he had been unconscious for a long time. But nevertheless, he had a lucky opportunity thanks to Gi Soil. But he shouldn't talk about rewards, as that could put him in danger. So he said he really appreciated what she thought of him. But to be honest, he didn't know yet. He hadn't even figured out the rewards. Therefore, he needed a little time to answer the questions properly. He also asked her not to worry that he would run away, because he knows that no hunter in this world can hide from the eyes of the Dark Empress. Analyzing the situation, the girl looked at him for a moment. Then she agreed and said that she appreciated it and would return when he had sorted everything out. After thanking the guy, she slammed the door behind her and left. At that moment, Ju was finally able to relax, and he did so. At the same time, he thought that life had been simply exciting lately, with the awakening after 3 days, the meeting with the ranger, and the strange dungeon to boot. On top of all that, he could end up on the wrong side of Parang if he wasn't careful. But at the same time, he could build a good relationship with him. At that moment, a system window appeared and announced that he was checking his rewards. The guy realized that he had fainted and hadn't even had time to check his rewards, so he started doing it now. First, he was congratulated on the fact that his energy had permanently increased by 20, and he also received the skill to teach all S-rank techniques. So he had 3 skills: skeleton summoning, memory restoration, and learning all techniques. After looking at everything he had, the hero was very happy. He thought, so even though the veterans are so obsessed with dungeons, it became interesting that this restoration of memory about reading the dead was like a hidden skill. Ju was really glad that he was able to read the old man's memories thanks to this skill, but he couldn't say he was impressed. But in any case, he was sure that someday he would find a worthy use for it. And then he began to study all the techniques. There were several effects, and the first required spending 20 energy to summon the master of all techniques. He cannot use physical force in this world, and can only pass on his knowledge. Also, the duration of this skill is 24 hours, and only the user of the skill can see the master of all techniques. Having figured it all out, the hero immediately got up and prepared to train. After a short time, he was already at the training ground with his things. And of course, the first thing he did was use the skill to learn all the techniques. This caused a bright flash, just like the one the dungeon boss had. From it, of course, appeared an old man who called the guy a brat and said that he had summoned him just in time. The guy in turn was very happy to see him, but for that, he immediately received a blow to the head and a new nickname. The master yelled after promising that he would inherit everything, which is why he had summoned him only now. If he really is that lazy, then he simply won't be able to handle it. Ju asked him not to get upset, because he called him as soon as he came to his senses. Meanwhile, he wondered if this old man was physically capable of influencing this world, so it was unclear how he had hit him. The master informed him, as expected, that he still had a long way to go, because his facial expression was very easy to read. It turned out that they were mentally connected, so he should tell him whether he would have difficulty causing him pain or not. In any case, since he had summoned him, he should start immediately, because they had no time, and the guy had to agree. He then asked if he understood correctly that he should simply summon the skeletons, but his interlocutor said that this was not the case, as there was simply no need for it. After all, first he had to decide what he would learn today. He understood the talents of these 10 perfectly well, and the main problem still lay with the young man himself. The main character did not understand why the main problem was him. Was the old man really trying to teach him? Soon, the teacher asked if he knew why he was called the master of all techniques. It turns out that he got this nickname after studying and perfecting countless talents. So did he really think that he only had 10 techniques to learn? Smiling madly, he said that all the other techniques would go to the young man. To say that Ju was surprised by this would be an understatement, because he certainly did not expect this. In order to understand the situation, he told the teacher that he himself had said that his talent was rubbish. This angered the master, and he yelled at him to shut up, and since he had made him that promise, he must inherit all of his skills. And if he couldn't do it, then he should keep trying until he could. And the old man could use one of his arts to make trash comparable to genius. And it's very good that he can point to its physical impact. There are several arts that he created, but was never able to apply. Hardened meridians can be opened with the help of chi. His body should improve if he massages it for 300 days. It will be painful, but he noticed that he is very persistent, so he should be able to cope. The guy was even more discouraged and realized that he was the owner of the body. So why was the other guy so happy to set a price for him? Therefore, he informed the gentleman that he did not feel that his heart was ready yet. But the old man shouted again, asking if he knew how many people in the world wanted to study with him, where he came from. This is called the Great Technique of the Heavenly Master, an art he created in the last years of his life, after much deliberation. Ju understood that if he had such a technique, shouldn't he have used it earlier? After all, this technique could turn trash into genius. The man said he understood perfectly well what he was thinking, that for this technique, he had to use his own energy as payment. He wondered what would happen if he changed a talentless student and increased his talent. The moment he did so, his body would melt and disappear. The hero asked what would happen to him now. The sage said that he was already dead, so everything would be fine. Ju realized that this was a very convenient way of thinking. He then asked if he could take any of those who tried to challenge him and use this technique on them, since he was already dead. The mentor hit him again for this and called him an idiot. The student couldn't understand why he had hit him again. The old man said that even when he tells him something, he doesn't understand the meaning, so he is definitely untalented. Hadn't he already said that it was something that turned trash into genius? And that it was meaningless unless used on trash? It is only useful if the target is at the level of food waste. Ju listened carefully to their conversation and realized that they were talking about him. The old man said that it would not work on people who were not at that level, because their bodies had already been influenced by other energies. Compared to them, the boy's body was very pure, but also weak. Although he had the ability to summon the dead, it had not changed his body. Not only that, but it was only the second method after all. Those born with genius were more impressive than those created, and he had originally intended to find a more impressive prospect than himself. Ju understood that the old man's words were harsh towards him, but not without meaning. He thought further. What if it was not only about skeletons, but also about the fact that he too could become stronger? It would be like killing two birds with one stone. In the end, the sage asked him if he was ready. Without a moment's hesitation, the young man said he was ready. A short time after the training began, he was already screaming. In terrible pain, he begged to wait at least a minute. The elder did not want to stop and continued, asking why he was screaming, since he had not even started yet. The guy thought to himself, if he wanted to become a ranger, he had to endure all this. But the teacher's words that this was only the beginning still frightened him greatly. The teacher, in turn, noticed that, as he had said, the boy was stubborn, which was good, so he would increase the pace. Ju begged himself and his body to endure it all. And soon, a system notification appeared, informing him that he had acquired the skill of pain resistance, and that this skill had potential for further development. At that very moment, the mentor delivered his own final blow, which was very powerful, and the guy's body collapsed to the ground almost immediately, completely drained of strength. The old man said that it was all for the sake of great technique, and that he had done an excellent job. Even though he was trash, he was capable of enduring a lot. He, in turn, had the desire to become stronger, as well as the willpower and perseverance to endure it all. So the sage was still glad that all was not lost. The hero gathered his strength and asked if they were done for the day. His interlocutor could not understand what he was talking about, because they still had 30 minutes left. So he lifted his student up and said to get up. Did he really think that today he would just enjoy a massage? Pointing to the skeletons, he asked if life wasn't waiting for him. Ju had no choice but to agree, and in the end, he thought he wanted to die. The master said that the basis of all professions is physical strength, and it seems that these skeletons can build physical strength even without muscles. But if that was the case, then he should start with the correct posture, which was the riding posture he had often used throughout his life. Human muscles are concentrated in the lower body, so a strong foundation is key to developing strength and stability. The hero thought about how he had just beaten all the nonsense out of him, and now he was forcing him to stand in this position. The master noticed as he said that the guy had no talent. However, if he had one thing, it was definitely perseverance. Besides, the master must not be weaker than the creatures he summoned, and the guy knew it, which is why he was trying his best to endure it. After all, his muscles are already torn and cannot even recover. In that case, it was unclear what the point of this training was. It was just torture. After a short period of time, exhausted, Ju collapsed to the ground. The teacher announced that training was over for the day, but he ordered the boy to do this every morning, otherwise he shouldn't even think about calling him. The hero reluctantly agreed, and the system announced that the skill for learning all techniques had expired. There was also a message stating that new ones could only be used after 24 hours, and the master of all techniques was also withdrawn. The skeletons lined up near the guy and looked at him. The hero turned to the first number, and he looked at him intently. The gentleman asked if he could carry him because at that moment, he couldn't even walk. Very soon he returned to work, and was immediately greeted by an acquaintance. It was the man who had given him his recent assignment. He said that the guy was finally here, and to come to him as soon as possible. Pointing to several guys, he asked if he recognized them, as they were one of the teams that had survived the last dungeon. Ju looked at them closely and realized that he did indeed remember them. The guys asked the necromancer how he was doing, and it seemed that he had changed a little, as he looked more muscular, and even better. The heroes of these words were a little embarrassed and wondered if they had just said that, although it was indeed true, because he had gained weight. It turned out that his shoulders had also become broader, as if even the structure of his skeleton had changed. Thoughts came to mind about whether this was really the result of a 30-minute massage. In any case, it was very interesting why these hunters had suddenly come for him. In order to find out, he asked why they had come here, and his interlocutor immediately apologized for introducing himself so late. He was pleased to meet him and asked to be allowed to formally introduce himself. His name was Kang Jae-ho, a hunter of the S rank, and he was impressed by the young man's actions and behavior. And since they had made it out alive, he would like to work with him. And then the hero understood everything. He noticed that they already knew he was just a mercenary, a low-level necromancer, and his name was Ju Dong-hoon. They then said that they should get down to business, as there was another dungeon, a well-known low-ranking type, and they wanted to hire him. This man had heard that he was experiencing financial difficulties, and would agree to any job. The main character realized who could have leaked this information and immediately looked at his employer. He realized that this guy had deceived them by selling him out in order to get his job back. Although Ju said it was true, he needed the money. His conversation partner added that it was fine, but this dungeon was not easy for an S rank. Nevertheless, it was worth a try. If they were lucky, the reward would be good. Recently, It seemed that someone had received a potion of strength. This reward really interested the guy. He understood that strength potions were a rare reward in dungeons, regardless of rank. They were high-level potions capable of curing any curse or disease. Jae-ho asked what he thought about it, whether it was good or not. This time, he would not be a porter, but a full member of the team. Ju did not agree quickly and asked about payment. The hunter asked what he meant by payment, since he was no longer a porter, and of course, it would be a fair share of the profits. The main character understood that this was very good. If the potion of strength were sold, its average price would be about 50 million won. It turned out that if divided among at least 6 people, it would be about 8.5 million for each, and that was quite a lot of money, which made Ju very happy. His conversation partner interrupted his thoughts at that moment and asked if he wanted to join, since the choice was definitely his. Don Hong agreed and said that he was tired of being a porter. He thought he was curious to see the power of his evolved skeletons in action, and this was a good chance to do so. Jae-ho said that was fine, then he just had to come to this place next Monday. The guy noted that he would look forward to the opportunity to work with them. And so, while training once again with the master and the skeletons, he talked about the dungeon, explaining that for some reason, hunters here become stronger thanks to these dungeons. The master said that it was ridiculous for a novice who had not even mastered the basics to try to run before he could walk. But the guy asked the elder to understand, because he also needed to earn a living. Then the teacher said that this principle was not bad, because he preferred practical experience. It was better in any case. Hearing this, Ju was delighted and asked if he would allow him to do so. But the mentor shouted that he would not tolerate any skipping of his own training sessions. He also did not understand why the reaction was so strange. Did he really want to slack off? He knew that the mentor could summon him to the dungeon. The guy wanted to say something else, but the mentor shouted that there was no time left and it was time to start the massage. Ju was terrified again, anticipating that he would be maimed again. Soon the guy would feel hellish pain in his own body again. The teacher declared that was enough for today and that the work had been done well. The hero was not pleased with this praise, because he had almost died again. Although there was a joyful moment, because he had acquired a new skill during the massage. He resisted the pain, and as it intensified, his senses weakened, so that if it weren't for that, he would have been dead long ago. Fortunately for the young man, this skill has potential for development. The master, in turn, told him that he had passed his test quite well, and Ju noticed all this thanks to him. The old man even began to take pride in him, and said that he thought they could increase the intensity of their training a little tomorrow. This prospect did not please the young man at all, because he realized that he had probably misunderstood him. But his interlocutor did not hear him, and only said that they should start their training with skeletons. That's why he drew attention to himself, and said that not everyone had gathered for the fight. Next, he told them to come over and squat down, just like last time. From that moment on, while they were training their physiques, he would teach each of them one technique every day. So he asked who wanted to be first. Since the skeletons couldn't speak, he pointed to the one with the ball and said that he would be the first. The subordinate immediately looked at his master for approval. When she said yes, the master said that the butcher had no skill and all he did was swing his sword. Well, as far as skill goes, they can develop it as they go along. So he ordered the skeletal creature to start swinging the sword. The skeleton couldn't quite understand why this old man was starting to give him orders. Then the hero said that everything was fine, he would make him the greatest swordsman. Although he would have to train until his bones broke. And even the skeleton didn't like this prospect at all. But after a short period of time, the training began. At that moment, the old man turned to the hero and asked if his name was really Ju Dong-hoon. The guy replied that he had understood correctly, and the old man said that he would call him that. Then he immediately asked what he thought fencing was. In response, the main character said that since it was called fencing, it must be a technique that used a sword. The mentor said that this was a fairly simple way of thinking, as he had expected. However, it turns out that he is right, and there is no need to think too much about it. Fencing skill is simply the ability to handle a sword. Nothing more, nothing less. He then threw the stick toward his student and told him to pick it up. At that moment, Don Hong understood everything. The old man didn't just want to be with you. The skeletons had inherited all the techniques, so it turns out that he wants him to inherit them as well. After picking up the stick, the boy stood waiting, and the old man told him to use it. The hero, in turn, could not quite understand how he wanted him to use it. The teacher noted that he had recently told him not to think about it and to hold it however he felt comfortable. Soon he asked if he had done what he had asked him to do and received an affirmative answer. The old man said that was good, and that in that case, he should swing as hard as he could. While the young man was doing this, his mentor praised him and said he was doing well. Although these words surprised the hero, he did not understand whether this old man was truly a master of the highest quality. Suddenly, the master approached him and asked him to look at the grip of his right hand. It turned out that his thumb was raised firmly, and the other 4 fingers held it in place. As for the swing position, he swung once from the 10 o'clock position to the 4 o'clock position, and then again from the 2 o'clock position to the 8 o'clock position. That's how it all happened, even though he hadn't even taught the guy anything yet. And it turns out that he swung instinctively, as he considered it more convenient for the cut, and his perception of the cut was based on everything he had experienced in his life. That is why it is necessary for him to simply put his life into this swing. He then asked to be allowed to ask one question. If he added power and speed to the cut he had just made, would it become more powerful or not? Ju immediately thought about it, and the master said that he was making a stupid face. Any cut becomes more powerful if you add your speed to it. A very simple fact that will never change, even if the end of the world comes. After thinking about it for a moment, the guy really understood everything. The teacher wants him to create his own cut and then add power and speed to it. The master, looking at him, said that it seemed like he was beginning to understand everything. In that case, now he knows what will happen if he repeats the cut 1,000,000 times and reaches its peak. Taking the weapon in his hands, he asked to watch carefully, because this is the fencing that he and this skeleton will learn. The guy began to watch intently, expecting to see the most powerful fencing technique. The old man, in turn, using the weapon in his hand, began to swing it in different directions. He said nothing, as if trying to fight the air, and when he finished demonstrating his art, he declared that there was no theory. The student simply needed to make his cut stronger. If he did that, then everyone would ultimately use his cut as a basis. Don Hong understood everything. There was nothing wrong with his posture being awkward. Who cares if he swings his sword differently? It's his sword, and he can swing it however he likes. And after only a short period of time, the system reported that he had acquired the slash skill, and that this skill had potential for further development. Guildmaster Paranga, ranked 58th in the world of Giparang, sat in his office. This master craftsman's nickname was Beautiful Bow. Suddenly, the door to his office swung open and Soy Yul entered. The guy immediately asked what was going on, since it was her first time coming to him. The girl said that something had been bothering her lately. That's why she asked if a D-rank hunter could suddenly display power surpassing that of a ranker. His interlocutor noted that this was a rather strange question, but Soy Yul simply asked him to answer. Giparang said that usually, even if you submit happy cases or study a skill, it takes time to make it your own. He would say that it was unlikely, and if such a case were the only explanation, it would be that he was hiding his abilities. The girl noted that he definitely wasn't hiding anything. Her interlocutor believed her, since even rankers cannot hide their abilities from her eyes. After all, the Dark Empress has a search skill that can easily handle this. That's why the guy didn't say it didn't make sense, but it was interesting what happened. Soy Yul, in turn, realized that she had not yet told her brother about the dungeon. And this happened because she wanted to tell him that she had been defeated many times. Remembering the old man, she burst into tears and had never felt so helpless. And yet she couldn't understand how a low-level hunter could have done anything. Of course, his first impression was indeed unusual. She was curious to see him, so she gave him a chance. And this young man turned out to be quite good, and she really used him. He promised to tell her everything as soon as everything was settled, so she was waiting for that. Suddenly, Giparang told his sister that she seemed suspicious, that she used to have a serious expression on her face, but now she was even smiling. She aroused his curiosity. Before, she didn't care about anything except wielding a dagger. His sister immediately stood up and shouted that nothing of the sort was true, and that she was simply leaving. The guy asked her not to be shy and just talk to her brother. Around this time, the hunters were at the agreed-upon location, waiting for one more person. Very soon, they saw that he had finally arrived. It was the hired necromancer, Ju, who came to them. Jeho greeted him and noted that he had sent the details of the dungeon via text message, confident that he had already checked them on the way. The hero said that this was indeed the case, as he knew everything about the main mission to destroy and defeat the boss in a very simple and typical dungeon. As his interlocutor had said earlier, he had applied sunscreen and stocked up on ice water. This pleased his companion, but Ju suddenly looked around. He was surprised that there weren't more people here than this man had mentioned. It was unclear who these two girls were who were talking about the gate to the dungeon. Jeho saw his surprise and said that this time they had invited 2 F-rank porters. So there was no need to worry. They had already paid them, so they wouldn't take anything from him. Everything finally became clear to the main character, and he was able to calm down. He thought that in order to collect ore and items, they would need porters in the dungeon. It turned out that this dungeon was of a low rank, so he was sure that everything would be fine. After all, his skeleton could defeat a D-rank orc, a higher-ranking creature, in the blink of an eye. Soon, the group of hunters he was part of entered the dungeon. The people were met by a desert, and the system reported the departure of the dungeon. It was said that the guy would be exposed to a harsh environment, and all his stats dropped by 10%. The members of the party began to discuss that it was hotter than expected here, and that they would have to think of it as a sauna. Ju looked at the others and didn't understand why it was so difficult. Remembering his training with the old man, he realized that it was all tolerable for him. It was literally child's play, especially compared to the hellish massage he got from his teacher. And so he used the power of his necromancy and summoned the awakened skeletons. The squad immediately appeared, and everyone lined up in a row. The hunters present immediately took notice of him, as this piqued their interest. One of the guys said to the necromancer, "Sir, it seems they are stronger than last time." Jeho asked them not to relax and to stay focused, as the monsters here were scorpions and snakes. He asked the hunters not to be afraid, because these were only low-level monsters. They just needed to watch them carefully and choose what to say and convey to them, to which the porters responded positively. Soon the squad set off, and after a short period of time, they did not understand how much further they had to go. Suddenly, the squad leader raised his hand and ordered everyone to stop. The hunter asked what had happened, because there was nothing there. And suddenly they all heard a strange sound coming from under the ground. It turned out that it was made by sand monsters that appeared very soon. The leader of the squad did not lose his composure, and grabbing his dagger, rushed into the attack. He shouted, "Everyone gather quickly and get into battle formation, then get ready." The squad immediately did so and reported that everyone was in combat stance. The main character, in turn, stood a little to the side and saw that these were medium-rank desert scorpions. They seemed to be as strong as the orc he had encountered on the training ground. He then turned to his magic skeleton and asked it to use an air shield on him, and when this happened to his necromancer squad, he shouted to destroy them. At the same time, he realized that he had ensured his own safety. First, as expected, the skeleton tank rushed into battle. The system reported that it was using a low-level ARG skill. The desert scorpions, in turn, immediately focused on the skeleton combat squad. The skeleton fencer immediately struck the creature's armor with his weapon. Unfortunately, he was unable to pierce it with the first strike. Dan Hong realized that even though he couldn't break through their defense, the attack was still working, so he shouted for them to continue. "If I keep doing this, he will be destroyed." And so, a few moments later, arrows flew at the sand monsters. The rest of the squad also rushed to attack. The main character just watched from the sidelines, but he realized that everything was going more smoothly than he had expected. Suddenly, Jaiho approached and told the necromancer that his skeletons were amazing, and it seemed that they were lucky with this chance encounter. The guy noted that it was nothing special. He was able to do it because he had dealt with the largest group. The leader smiled and asked him not to be modest, saying that chance encounters improve one's personality. Ju just thanked him for treating him kindly, but he understood that he was still wary of what is often referred to as a chance encounter. Adding to everything else, another equally significant fact was troubling him. All the hunters in this squad were very strong, and it seemed to him that they didn't need to take an E-rank hunter as a mercenary. On top of all this, they all knew very well that he had received an award from a dungeon of increased difficulty, but because of their non-disclosure agreement with Parang, they cannot openly talk about it or ask him about it. These people have only one way to answer their questions, and that is to study the potion. There are no surveillance cameras there, and no traces will remain. On top of that, everyone knows that accidents often happen in such underground facilities. The guy understood perfectly well that he had to be careful, because right now it was only a suspicion. The leader of the squad liked everything about this, and he was plotting something. After a short time, the squad reached some ruins. The system reported that this was the ancient king of the desert scorpions, and that in order to respond to him, a sacrifice had to be made. To do this, 2 offerings had to be placed on special places on the altar. It turned out that the sacrifices had to be living hunters of rank F or higher. After reading this information, the hero was very surprised, because nothing had been said about this before. One of the hunters smiled at that moment and remarked that it was all very strange. He did not understand how this could have happened, and how they could find an offering in the middle of the desert. The other guys began to smile slyly. The porter realized that the situation was quite bad, and asked the group leader what it all meant. Jeho didn't understand. Hadn't they heard that 2 offerings had to be brought? 2 living hunters with an F rank or higher? So he didn't understand why they were standing there frozen, and told them to get up. The porter didn't understand. Had they gone mad? The leader replied that if it was easier for them to think that way, then they shouldn't feel shy about it. One of the girls asked why they were doing this to them. Was it really the case that they had originally intended to sacrifice them? The leader immediately smiled. Then he asked if they thought it was strange that the pay was higher than usual and why anyone would want to use trash like them. If they, in turn, wanted to get high pay, they had to pay a high price. Wasn't that common sense? The main character, watching from the sidelines, realized that this situation was indeed strange. He realized that if this man was behaving this way in front of him, it meant that he was confident that he could easily defeat him. The leader grabbed his dagger and said, "Stop resisting, let them go to the altar." It seemed that the porters were doomed, but suddenly the main character came to their defense. Jeho couldn't understand what was going on because the guy didn't need to interfere, or else it meant that he was going against them. It seemed that this young man was either more naive than he thought or was simply playing the hero. Ju asked him to shut his filthy mouth and inquired about his purpose. Why did he come to the mercenary guild and bring him here? His interlocutor noticed that he wasn't completely stupid after all. The hero didn't like this pause, so he yelled at him to hurry up and talk. As expected, Jeho said that he had passed through the dungeon not only thanks to luck, so he probably already understood what they were interested in knowing about the chance encounter. He didn't know how he had prepared and defeated that ranger, but that was why they had gone so far to bring him to the dungeon. They, in turn, had no intention of fighting him. The guy was surprised by this, and his interlocutor said that they did it to show him that they were this kind of people and ask if he wanted to join them. Of course, if he wanted to join, he would have to give them a share of what they had gained from their successful encounter. After all, their team was fair when it came to distribution. The main character just smiled and said that they were just crazy scoundrels. To sum up their words, it became abundantly clear that they were villains and were asking if he wanted to join them. And if he did, they would let him have his rewards. But was that really their plan? The guy really didn't like this situation, and he just wanted to send them all away. So he decided to fight and ordered skeleton number 3 to attack. The skeleton immediately drew his bow and tried to shoot. The arrows flew toward the enemies, who had recently been his comrades. However, the leader of this squad easily dealt with all these arrows. Then he realized that this was his answer, and then he would regret it. The hero announced that he would not cooperate with the bunch of animals after all. And when he said that, you knocked him down and rushed into the attack again. So Jeho had to defend himself against them on his own. Then he asked if the guy thought he had become stronger just because he had a chance. After all, just a few days ago, he was just an ordinary porter. Watching from the sidelines, Ju realized that this guy was stronger than he thought. He wasn't at a high level, but his strength was close to the next level. And perhaps even better than the next level, because his strength is very good. Suddenly, the guy started smiling and asked if he thought he could beat him, because he was the only one he was dealing with. This was a big mistake on his part, because he probably didn't know why they were so fearless in the unknown dungeons. Suddenly, the main character clearly heard the thirst for blood coming from the side. At that moment, a dagger flew in his direction, which fortunately was stopped by a skeleton. But even so, the necromancer, who is the summoner, felt this power. At that moment, a silhouette appeared behind the leader of the enemy squad. Jeho noticed that the hunter behind him was a high-ranking assassin hiding in the shadows. The enemy who appeared asked if they were sure this was the right guy, if he was the one who cleared the dungeon that Soil couldn't pass. His companion noted that this was true, but he didn't look particularly strong. The main character realized that this man was not a high-level character, although it was a miracle that he had lasted so long against a B rank. And while the guy was thinking about this, he felt someone pushing him. It was one of the porters. She apologized for causing the guy unnecessary trouble, even though it meant the end for them. But she was still very grateful to him. Looking at her, Ju didn't understand what they had done to deserve this. Besides, why should they be sacrificed just because they were weak? He firmly decided that he would not let them do it and would protect these people. If someone with a high rank appeared, they would need a powerful ally who was strong enough. So he called on his teacher to trample them into the ground. Jeho was already prepared to fight Ju. And then the master appeared and said that he knew this would happen when a novice like that went into the dungeon. The guy noticed that the situation could not be delayed and asked for advice. The mentor said that he should accept his fate, because he was no match for these guys. How unfortunate that he, who claimed to be his student, could not even cope with such words. Then Ju asked him to stop complaining, because if he died, he would not be able to achieve his goal. His interlocutor asked what difference it made, since he hadn't asked him to get involved in this matter, and he wasn't to blame for it, only this brat. Even if the old man had mastered all the techniques, he wouldn't be able to do the impossible. At that moment, the masked man from the squad said that this was their first meeting, so he would ask politely what he had gained from this opportunity. The main character thought about the fact that they needed the reward he had received earlier. And that all means that this is the solution to his situation. They, in turn, try to intimidate him and pretend to be in control of the situation. But they will have problems if he does not cooperate and share his secrets. In that case, he knows what to do, and everything became clear to the old man. Ju asked if that meant they wanted to know about his ability. The assassin said that it was true, that it was a reward for the dungeon that even that scoundrel Soy Yul couldn't pass. so of course he was interested. The guy smiled and said that in that case, he would tell him, since he was an A-rank hunter after all. His companion hid his weapon and said that it was a wise choice, that he was smarter than he thought. The hero continued to say that it wasn't that simple. He wouldn't tell him until he let him fight those damn traitors. At that moment, the disappointment and resentment in his heart prevented him from speaking. That's why he asked if he liked the deal. The high-level hunter, of course, did not like it. The main character, in turn, asked him to understand that he had some kind of mental disorder. No matter how dangerous the situation was, he couldn't stand it when his pride was hurt. The assassin asked him in surprise what he was thinking. The guy said he wasn't thinking anything. He knew he couldn't escape. Even if he were plotting something, he would never be able to deceive the eyes of a high-level hunter. His interlocutor said that he was indeed right. And Jae-ho asked why his brother was hesitating, whether he was seriously going to listen to this nonsense. The main character continued, saying that he knew very well that he would die soon, and who would think that he could survive when the killer from the hidden shadows was right in front of him. But even if he died, he would let these scoundrels go unharmed, so he asked to be allowed to do so. And if they couldn't accept this deal, then they should just kill him. But either that, or he would have to end his life right now. The assassin immediately asked him to wait a minute. He said he would give him exactly 30 minutes. But if he tried to do anything stupid, it would end badly. In that case, he would make sure that he lived in torment forever, unable to die. And he asked quite sternly whether the guy understood or not. Ju, in turn, immediately declared that he understood everything. Jae-ho was very angry at the situation that was developing. He asked if this low-level necromancer really thought he could defeat him. In response, the hero said that they wouldn't know until they tried. Suddenly, the master addressed him and remarked that now that everything was ready, he would intervene as promised. And this time, today's training should be replaced with practical guidance in real time. He then asked what the young man should do to counter this killer, and Ju replied that he should probably conserve his strength as much as possible. The mentor said that this was correct, minimum effort for maximum effect, and also asked to be allowed to teach him the strategy of using the enemy's strength against himself. The guy thanked the elder and asked him to fight alongside him. And so, after a short interval, the battle with the enemy skeleton squad began. The skeletons interacted with each other, delivering specific types of strategic strikes. Because of these actions, the hunters even had to retreat, as the attacks were sudden. After retreating once again, Jae-ho became angry and called the guy a scoundrel. At the same time, the skeleton wizard used a first-level fireball skill. Once again, the enemy squad had to retreat, because it was fire, although they couldn't understand since when skeletons had been throwing fireballs. While the people were running away, the skeletons rushed after them, not leaving them for a second. Therefore, the former leader of the squad had to fight the swordsman again. And this time, one of his blades was destroyed. Naturally, the guy didn't like that because he realized that the situation was bad. While he was thinking about it, he received a kick from a skeleton right in the chest. The assassin, watching the fight from the sidelines, realized that the skeletons were simply flawless, as were their movements. It could be said that at this rate, this guy could really win the battle. Suddenly, he sensed something and was surprised by its presence. It was unclear why he sensed the presence of this guy in the dungeon when he should have been outside and on the lookout. At that very moment, Jae-ho was not in the best condition. At that moment, he saw a shadow falling on him, which meant that someone had approached. Looking ahead, he saw the main character standing nearby. The guy yelled at him not to come any closer and to leave him alone. The master said that they were too weak to call it real combat experience. But it was a good start, and the student noted that he would gain real combat experience with this killer. The old man yelled at him not to get cocky, because he would have to give it his all if he wanted to beat him at his level. The young man declared that he had risked his life from the very beginning and was not afraid of anything. And just as he was about to start the fight, he sensed a presence. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of a person approaching. At that moment, the master realized that another killer just as foolish as him had just entered the battlefield. The guy is really good at everything else, but he never thinks ahead, and that's bad. Ju realized that his mentor was right. He had no more tricks up his sleeve and was still a weakling in this world of hunters. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to. But it was completely unclear why he was so confident that he would take such a risk. Sensing the presence of another assassin, Jae-ho smiled and asked the hero, "Did you really think they would come with only one elder from the hidden shadows?" Ju understood that if this was the case, the situation was bad for him, and he needed to run away. Suddenly, the man who had arrived turned to his companion and said that it was time for them to run away, because Gi So-yul was here. The main character was very surprised when he heard about the girl. He didn't understand why she was here at all. The newcomer continued to speak, saying that they needed to act immediately because there was no time to think. If they were caught, they would surely die. A few moments after the conversation, they did not immediately run away. Jae-ho, in turn, was shocked by what was happening and tried to address them, but it was too late. Ju realized that even high-level assassins had fled, which meant that this was the power of a rancor. Soyul, in turn, remained at the entrance to the dungeon. At the same time, she thought about how she was overreacting. She was following the guy as if she were really stalking him. She was able to track him to this dungeon using Parang's information, but in the end, she began to think that all this was wrong. After all, he had promised her that he would tell her everything as soon as he had sorted out all his affairs, if she gave him time. So in the end, she decided to give him time and wait a little longer. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, the skeletons continued to fight the enemy squad. Ji was in a critical situation and wondered if Ju had decided that he would die like this. But that was not part of his plan, so he decided that he would live and survive using everything he had. The hero in turn watched this man closely and understood that he was trying very hard. But he could see right through him because he couldn't defeat him in strength, so he planned to do something with the porters behind him. So the guy turned to the first number and ordered him to act. After that, the skeleton swordsman immediately rushed to attack his opponent in front of him. Jae-ho did not expect such a swift attack and did not have time to react, so he lost his arm because of it. At that moment, the hero wondered if he had been weaker. Would this man have spared him or not? Although he could admit that this would never have happened. The same applied to the other members of this squad. The former leader of the squad sat down and called Ju a scoundrel, and also asked if he really thought he would just put up with all this. After these words, he successfully got to his feet and rushed forward. But the swordsman was already on guard at that moment and prepared for further battle. So, with a single thrust like this, he struck the guy, cutting off his leg. Jae-ho received another dose of pain because of this and immediately fell to the ground. Then he again called his enemy the worst scoundrel because of what had happened to him. He asked why this was happening, why he had to face him. The hero, not fully understanding his dissatisfaction, asked what he was talking about. After all, it turned out that he was the one who had appeared before him. Then his interlocutor said that he should not waste time and just kill him already. Ju, noticing the altar, asked how it was possible to simply kill him. He apologized, of course, but the other man would not die so easily. The enemy grabbed him with his remaining limb and simply asked him to kill him. But a moment later, a skeleton grabbed him by the limb. Then he lifted him up, and the man wondered what he was doing. Naturally, the undead did not answer him and just dragged him somewhere. It turned out that he was to be sacrificed on the altar, where he was thrown. The main character said that they needed to sacrifice 2 living hunters to open the boss room. While the former leader of the squad was angry, the system reported that the sacrifices had been made, and the conditions were now being checked. At that moment, Ju thought that if this hadn't happened, he would have simply left the dungeon without clearing it. But it turns out that this is a completely different story. Now he gives everything he receives in return from people. He responds to the kindness he receives with kindness. And he takes revenge with his own hands if someone tries to take his life. And in that case, he will take their lives. Finally, the system window said that the conditions had been met, and the 9th seal had been removed. The hero said goodbye to the fat people he had brought and thought that if there was a next life, then let them live well. On top of all this, he became quite curious as to why Gi Soil was not here yet. The shadow ghosts had long since scattered, fearing her appearance. If it weren't for her, everything could have turned out completely differently, and the guy would have had to fight 2 A-rank hunters. And he, in turn, could have ended up on the altar instead of those he sent there. Before he had time to think about it, he heard a strange sound that literally signaled the opening of the door. The system reported that the ancient Scorpion King had been released. His rage, suppressed for centuries, bursts forth in the heavens. It was also reported that the awakened skeletons were suppressed by the presence of a powerful creature, and all indicators were reduced by 20 points. Ju immediately became alert and realized that this was making him nervous. One of the porters then turned to him and asked if it would be okay. The necromancer smiled, saying that he didn't know anything, but he could say for sure that it was better than fighting shadow ghosts. His interlocutors noted that this was most likely true. The hero finally calmed down and decided that he simply had to do what he had been practicing. The master, who was nearby, asked if he was sure he could handle these creatures without needing his insignificant creation. Indeed, if the student could not cope with such a thing, it would be better to just die. But the guy asked him not to joke with such a serious face, to which the old man replied that he had no intention of doing so, but that he should not forget to call him tomorrow. Ju tried to stop him, but it was too late, because the time for learning all the techniques had ended. This confused him a little because he did not expect everything to happen so quickly. A few moments later, a sound began to be heard, signaling the presence of the boss. And indeed, an ancient scorpion, which was very fierce, burst out. The guy realized that in the end, he would have to face this creature alone, so let it attack. After a few moments, he realized that the battle would not be so easy. The skeletons immediately took up fighting stances, waiting for the battle to begin. This was because the scorpion in front of them suddenly disappeared. Ju immediately began to hope that the attack would not come from underground. But to be on the safe side, he asked the wizard skeleton for protection, and the latter used an air shield. He ordered the rest to spread out and form a formation. Tank, as usual, was in front, but protecting the necromancer's leader. The archer, who was behind the formation, suddenly sensed something strange. It turned out that the ground beneath his bones began to crack, and something appeared from there. This creature turned out to be the boss, who really did attack from under the ground. This surprised the main character, because the creature ignored him and attacked the skeleton behind him, which meant that it had intelligence. The monster really had no intention of attacking the necromancer, and turned toward the other skeletons. In order to protect his subordinates, Ju immediately sent the tank there. After what happened, the system reported that number 4 had used the low-level ARG skill. Of course, this attracted Scorpion's attention, and he had already turned in the other direction. Dan Hong saw everything clearly and realized that the creature was attacking them. As a result of these actions, the tank had to use a skill called low-level block. The necromancer was glad that he had successfully blocked it, and now the guy had a chance, so he immediately turned around and looked at the wizard. Then, using his staff, he ordered everyone else to attack Scorpion immediately. Arrows and magical elements were immediately used. The attacks were not that deadly, but the guy thought that no one cared. After all, he could say with certainty that no one would be strong enough to fight against the whole group. While he was rejoicing and thinking that everything would be fine, the scorpion suddenly turned around quickly and threw the attackers away. At that moment, the skeletons had to retreat a little in order to regroup. Ju figured this out, although it was quite difficult, but quite effective. Judging by the boss's condition, he was definitely taking quite a bit of damage. That's why he told his subordinates not to worry if they died, but to just keep attacking. It soon became clear that the guy had only 50 energy points left. But that's okay. As long as he has the energy to summon his skeleton, he is practically invincible. The swordsman fighting in the negotiations was destroyed by that scorpion. The main character immediately used his summon, and he soon found himself back on the battlefield. The scorpion was confused, as he did not expect them to be resurrected. The skeletons, in turn, fearlessly attacked him again with renewed strength. The ancient monster, seeing what was happening, immediately prepared to fight them. He tried to defend himself with his tail, but it was cut off by the swordsman. Seeing what was happening, the others immediately rushed to help and attacked again. The scorpion's body, consisting of multiple layers of defense, was defeated. The main character, who saw this, was a little surprised, but realized that it was a good thing. The system congratulated him on defeating the Scorpion King in the desert, and he was delighted. Although he understood perfectly well that it had been quite difficult, as he had only 10 energy points left. If his enemy had been even a little stronger, he would have definitely lost. The system reported that the spearman's strength and the Moonlight Warrior's strength had been increased by 1, and their skills had also been increased by 1. Ju was glad that the skeleton's abilities and characteristics had increased, as expected of a C-rank boss. The system then informed him that he had found the poisonous gland of an ancient king, desert scorpions, and asked if he would take it. The hero naturally agreed and accepted this reward, for which he received the item. The poisonous gland immediately appeared in his hand, and glowed with an ordinary color. The guy became curious about what it was. Was it really just an ingredient? The description said it was the essence of the poison of a king, hidden in the tail of an ancient desert scorpion. It contained about 20 types of highly toxic poisons and several effects, which he could use as an ingredient for crafting equipment and as an ingredient for skills. The moment the skeleton read this, it began to address him. It turned out that skeleton number 3 reacted to the poisonous gland of the ancient king of the Scorpion Desert. And then a congratulation appeared about the hidden conditions, which said that to make a poisonous arrow, you need a certain amount of luck. It was also necessary to obtain a poisonous ingredient of D rank or higher. The guy was surprised that the skill could be unlocked in this way. Finally, he understood why the Dark Lord always talked about dungeons. The system suddenly asked if he was going to learn this skill. After Ju happily agreed, his status as a Bone Knight was upgraded, and he learned the poison arrow skill. It also turned out that there were congratulations that he had passed the stage in the ancient kingdom of scorpions, and received a reward for this achievement. Then a bright light appeared, signaling the exit from the dungeon. The porters were very happy at that moment that they had been saved and had indeed survived, and they thanked the necromancer. Saying that they would never forget this, the hero declared that they considered it a good lesson and would not go anywhere in the future just because they were offered a lot of money. Soon after, they said goodbye to each other and went their separate ways. When this happened, Ju thought that he needed to check the rewards, and as a result, he received a B-rank Ancient Desert Trace item. Then the guy was a little surprised and suddenly noticed a key that appeared in his hand. But immediately the question arose as to why, according to the description, it was a key that unlocked the secrets hidden in relics. It could open the ancient desert dungeon and was also linked to the hunter Ju Dong-hoon. The hero wondered if it was something like a connected dungeon or something like that. He, in turn, really wanted someone to explain all this to him. Suddenly, he sensed the presence of another person and immediately turned his attention there. It turned out to be the Dark Empress, who had been there all along. The girl was a little embarrassed and said that they hadn't seen each other recently and that he had asked her to give him some time to collect his thoughts. She thought that he had sorted everything out since he was going to the dungeon. And besides, if she hadn't found him herself, he wouldn't have come back to her. Ju was very surprised by this, but said he understood everything, although in reality, he couldn't imagine what to do. Should he tell her the truth, or was it better to lie? Looking at the sword the Japanese man was carrying, he immediately wondered what would happen if she caught him lying. Therefore, it would probably be better to tell her the truth, and that would definitely be better. On top of that, he was a novice hunter who knew nothing about this world. If he could use this as an opportunity to establish a connection with a ranger, he should take advantage of it. Then, gathering his thoughts, he said that she wanted to know how he had passed that dungeon and what reward he had received for it. If that's the case, then yes, he was going to tell her everything. But even so, he had one condition. Soil was a little surprised, unexpected that there would be any conditions at all. Don Hong said that first of all, he needed her to protect him while he was developing. This surprised his interlocutor even more, so she asked if he owed someone something. In response, the guy remarked that it wasn't quite that simple, as he was being hunted by bullies. The Dark Empress added, "Well, what else did he say?" "First, it means there must be something else." The hero said that he was a novice, so he asked her to teach him what he did not know within reason. For example, talking about this key. Soyul couldn't believe her eyes and asked if he was really a medium. The guy realized that she knew something and asked her about it. But it was strange that this thing could surprise even a ranger, and it was probably really expensive. Then the Dark Empress asked if he got it from this dungeon. The guy noted that she understood everything correctly, and the girl said that he was just incredibly lucky. The chances of finding a medium in a normal dungeon are practically zero. There are less than 100 known in the world, and besides, it is bound in such a way that they cannot exchange it. Ju understood that this was good, but he was curious about what he was doing. His interlocutor continued, saying that a medium is also a kind of lucky opportunity. When people immerse themselves in them, quests related to them appear. These related quests raise the rank conditions, eventually reaching S rank or higher. At the same time, all the mediums she knew had reached this level. Upon receiving this information, the hero couldn't believe it and was very surprised. Then Soil said that the ranks were desperately searching for these items. She then thought for a moment and said that she would accept his conditions after all. But even so, she added that she also had a condition of her own. After a while, she and Ju arrived at a certain place. It turned out to be the place where he lived, and she asked in surprise if this was really it. Don Hu said that it probably looked pretty shabby. Even though he had said that she didn't need to follow him here, Soyul said that it wasn't necessary, because a promise is a promise. After looking around a bit, she said that there were no tracking devices or hunters above rank D around the building, so she could say with confidence that he was safe. The main character asked if she had already checked everything, and the girl replied that she had confirmed his place of residence and would remain on the roof for now, so he should let her know when he was going to training tomorrow. Ju agreed and remembered how their deal had gone. The hunter asked him to let her watch his training sessions. The necromancer didn't understand why she wanted to do that, but she said she had been watching his energy since he cleared out the old man's dungeon, and now he was getting stronger at an exponential rate. This alone made her very curious about how he was achieving such rapid growth. Remembering this situation, the guy finally slammed his door shut. He realized that he had already explained about the happy opportunity. We are talking about that very old man, as well as what kind of training he is undergoing. However, despite everything, there was still one problem. He talks about shadow ghosts and says it will be bad if they continue to threaten him. However, he intends to give them back as much as he receives in return. While he was thinking about this and lost his concentration, he suddenly felt someone hit him. Intense pain, causing unbearable torment, immediately swept through his body from his back. It turned out to be his master, who shouted at him not to react too sharply, because his body was beginning to take shape. In other words, it means that they need to increase the intensity, and he thinks he should understand that. While the old man continued to do this, the guy asked his friend to wait because this was simply violence. The mentor looked at him in surprise, asking what he had just said. What kind of violence? How dare he describe his great technique, the painstakingly created technique of a heavenly master, as something as vulgar as violence? He, in turn, needed to be prepared, and the young man immediately realized that he needed to run, but it was already too late. After a short period of time, there was a bench of pain resistance, but this skill also still had potential for further development. As promised, the Dark Empress continued to watch the main character. He, almost like a half-corpse, asked what she was looking at, and his interlocutor remarked that no matter how many times she saw it, she could not get used to it. Just think. Since then, he has been undergoing such training every day. Ju realized that he had explained everything related to the old man to Gi So-yul. It was abundantly clear that she, in turn, could not see him and could not repeat after him. While Dong-hoon was thinking about this, the instructor yelled at him to get up, because they still had 30 minutes left. The student barely got up and said that he knew he shouldn't be lying down when his level was so low, and that he would get up right away. It turns out that yesterday he trained with Skeleton 2, and today it was Skeleton 3's turn. After all, his skeletons were getting stronger every day. But the problem was that the stronger they got, the more he had to study and train. There are quite a few skills that he can use. His subordinates from the first number have the skills of breaking, piercing, and shooting. The tank has the defense skill, and the guy has learned all of their skills except for the wizard skill, which is a mage. After all, in order to teach him the skill, he needs to learn how to use Kai. While Ju was thinking about this, the old man continued to draw the circle. Pointing to it, the mentor told the boy to sit in the circle with his legs crossed. The student asked if he really had to just sit there, and was told to read the formula for the Great Blue Heart technique that he had taught him last time. But he should not recite it thoughtlessly, because he needed to concentrate and feel how the formless energy moved. Naturally, the main character immediately began to do so. Reading the formula, he heard various sounds and quietly continued to recite it. The voices coming from outside said that he didn't think it was him mentally. Because breathing is the most important step in this technique, the old man said. It would be bad if he couldn't exist. Kai, while he was teaching these skeletons the basics. In that case, there was no choice, and he would simply consider him a failure and intensify the training. The guy realized that he was planning to beat him half to death and that he had no choice. Therefore, he realized that if he became stronger, he would be able to endure all of this. As usual, So-yul was on the roof of the house looking around the neighborhood. All her thoughts raced through her head and were focused on Ju. The girl wondered if he had really become a student of that strange old man. She still remembered how many times he had thrown her away. Remembering this, the Dark Empress paused and realized that it was terrible. She thought it was because of his determination to endure pain when his body was twisted and his bones were crushed, which was simply impressive. Therefore, she had to acknowledge his strength, and thought there was no other choice but to watch him for now. The old man she couldn't do anything about was now standing next to the young man. Just watching him grow, she feels that someday she will be able to overcome her limitations. And yet it is very interesting to see how much this guy will grow, even very much so. At that time, a conversation was taking place in the main office of the Hidden Days. The guy who met the main character in the recent dungeon led him to the boss. The boss was told there that they needed support because of Gi So-yul. Then he said that they didn't really want to interact with this Parang Guild. The owner of the Guild of Permanent Shadows is called Nick Shakan. He ranks 92nd in the world under the pseudonym Cerberus. The subordinate apologized, because he should have dealt with all this before the girl intervened. The head stated that this was indeed an opportunity that would allow him to keep the rankers in one hand. His interlocutor agreed, considering that this difficult woman was showing interest. Nick added that it was quite tempting, and he had to admit that. After saying all this, he immediately snapped his fingers. At that moment, a girl with a dark aura appeared, asking if he had called her. The man inquired about the work schedule of the Permanent Shadows, and was told that they were fully booked for the coming months. The boss was a little confused by this, and then asked what Ju's rank was now. His subordinate immediately informed him that the person he was referring to had a low rank. Nick said that meant he still had a long way to go. That's good enough. Then let them check his schedule in a month, and he'll take a look at it himself. He was quite interested in this guy they were talking about. The hero, in turn, did not stop training and continued to do so. The Dark Empress continued to watch them, and still couldn't get used to it. Finally, Ju finished his set and collapsed, literally exhausted. Seeing this, Gi So-yul immediately approached him. The hero asked what she wanted, and the girl came closer. She then immediately announced that she had something to tell him. Don Juan was intrigued, so he even got up. The Dark Empress continued, saying that she promised to protect him from any ambush until he became stronger. The hero noted that this was indeed the case, but he did not think that she would watch over him 24 hours a day. His interlocutor did not understand how she could protect him if she did not watch him constantly. Then Ju pointed out that she was a tanker and had a dungeon to go through and things to do. The girl added that this was why she was talking about it now. She'd been watching over him for several weeks, even though she had neglected the guild's affairs. But there were things she had to do. Therefore, she pointed her finger and informed him that he had two options to choose from. The first was to follow her for 6 hours, and the second was to use the medium key he had received after passing through the dungeon. The guy finally remembered it and was even a little happy. After that, he tried to summon it, and a trace of an ancient desert appeared. Several of its effects were also shown, as well as the fact that it could open the medium. Soyul said mediums, devoted items, and that means it will be a single dungeon, so it might be safer to be inside the dungeon than with her. The hero said that it would be a B-rank dungeon, so wouldn't it be more dangerous inside? The girl immediately smiled and said that this was not entirely true. He might not notice how much he had grown. This would be a good opportunity to test his strength. Judging by what she saw, he should be able to pass it. Ju was a little embarrassed by these words, because he realized that he had just been praised by a ranker. As an abnormal necromancer, no one recognized him as an E-rank mercenary. Therefore, he couldn't believe that he had received someone's recognition. Picking up the medium, he realized that it was indeed a good idea, and he would choose the second option. Soyul said that she knew about it and wondered if he would go now. The guy replied that there was no reason to hesitate, since he had already finished his morning training. Then his interlocutor asked him to pour his energy into the key to activate it and open the dungeon. The main character listened carefully to what she said and understood what he had to do. So when he did that, the key started to glow, and the system asked him if he wanted to activate the trace of the ancient desert. It also said that he could still open this dungeon, and that it was a single one. Since Ju had decided for him, he did not hesitate, and simply told his interlocutor that he would return soon. The Dark Empress said nothing in response, only smiled, hoping that he would pass it with ease. The main character, in turn, was already expecting to end up in the dungeon. A few moments later, when the light finally dimmed, he appeared in the right place. The only surprising thing was that there was a pyramid right in front of him, and a message appeared in the system window saying that he had entered an ancient desert and discovered a pyramid. Naturally, the first thing the guy did upon arrival was to use his staff. And of course, he summoned his own skeletons to make it easier to fight. He understood perfectly well that there was no need to rush, because logically, the dungeon should be inside the pyramid. That's why he ordered the skeletons to keep formation and follow him. They obeyed him, and the guy understood perfectly well that they were too weak for this dungeon. That is why they had to fight as if they were weak. Approaching the entrance door to the pyramid, he opened it. Unfortunately, the guy couldn't see anything inside. At the same time, he was glad that the door opened so easily because it was simple. When Ju entered, the system reported that a connection between the dungeon and the hunter profession had been detected. It then said that the dungeon was transforming and he couldn't leave it. The main character immediately became wary because of this, and the door they had just entered was sealed. And just as that happened, a powerful surge of energy instantly swept through the entire room. It was so powerful that it threw all the skeletons and the guy to the side. After a short period of time, the guy began to slowly get up. He stated that he had entered so confidently only to find himself in such a situation. He then turned to skeleton number 3, and he finally answered him. The guy was pleased that the skeletons were next to him, and he decided to scout out the situation first. And so the archer used his safe vision skill and sent an arrow forward. From what he saw, it became abundantly clear that there was an open space at the end. But even so, the question immediately arose as to whether this was the right path. Although the hero had no choice but to move forward. Suddenly, a bright flash appeared right in front of him, blinding him. The system immediately announced that the guy had discovered the stage of the Sun Spear's offense. Deep inside the pyramid lies the warrior and absolute ruler of the ancient desert empire, the Sun Spear. It is necessary to break through the obstacles and reach him. Don Hong saw many skeletons with spears right in front of him, and did not understand what they were. Once, heavy rain fell on the streets of one of the settlements in the desert. There was also a boy there who was not quite like ordinary people. This was because he had wings which he flapped like a bird. Naturally, the people who saw this shouted that he was a monster. He is a dirty, insignificant creature. It is unclear how a half-breed thinks he can fit into their school, so let him just die. That's how some people tried to cut off his hands as soon as he was born. Others, in turn, tried to cut off his ankles. But in the end, someone took his eyes. And then a man with a weapon in his hands attacked him. But the boy, despite all his problems, fought very well and repelled his attack. After that, he immediately killed the man who had tried to kill him. All this happened, of course, to the other people who attacked him. The boy thought that if everyone tried to take what belonged to him, he would in turn take what belonged to them. Returning to the present, the hero continued to look at the skeleton that was right in front of him. Of course, he understood perfectly well that the situation was bad, and the system was telling him to be careful, because 100 ancient rank D spearman skeletons were approaching. Before the battle began, Ju ordered the skeleton tank to block the front, and he thought about how dangerous it was to stay in the open. and that he needed to lure them into the corridor, where they would have a chance. After all, only a limited number of enemies could enter it, and he and his subordinates would hold their ground and destroy several of them at a time. Thus, many skeletons continued to advance in the hope of defeating their enemies. The tank and the others still tried to hold them back. And of course, they attacked them with short lunges in order to destroy them one by one. This was done by the front line with spears and swords in their hands. The main character immediately thought about the fact that everything was fine while everyone was eating. But despite this, the endurance of the Bone Man would sooner or later reach its limit. Therefore, Dan Hong shouted to them that they should defend themselves mindlessly and retreat slowly. The skeletons obeyed the order, communicating this with the clacking of their bones. The archer also joined the battle, easily destroying enemies with his arrows. The guy was happy that they would defeat them one by one and aim for the next target. But while he was thinking about this, he didn't see several spears flying in his direction. He had to defend himself right away, and thanks to his training, he easily caught the spear. After that, his swordsman immediately destroyed the one who attacked him. The skeleton wizard also had no intention of staying out of the battle, and was already prepared. A magical fireball immediately appeared in the sky, and the system reported that he had used it. Having accumulated enough energy, the wizard launched the ball and hit many targets. The enemies in the restricted area were destroyed, although there were still quite a few left. They did not look at the victims of their fellow creatures, and simply continued on their way. And there were really a huge number of them there. Seeing what was happening, the main character realized that this was definitely not enough. But he was not going to despair, and mentally thought that these scoundrels should come closer. And the enemies didn't mind, because they had to strike those who came to them. And so the battle continued as before, with the skeleton tank blocking the damage. But at a certain point, its endurance was truly running out, and it couldn't hold out any longer and was destroyed. So the main character, seeing this immediately, used the power of his necromancy. Of course, he summoned the skeleton tank and spent 10 energy points. The enemies who had just destroyed it were even a little shocked. Dan Hong thought that he would simply pick up a new spear if it broke and continue to thrust it into his enemies. With his own method and his own stance, he would continue to do so. Therefore, the young man did not stop and was now fighting his skeletons on equal terms. But of course, there was also danger, because they attacked him in the same way. Thus, the fierce battle continued for quite some time, until the main character stopped, and his great amount of strength was not spent. At that moment, the system reported that the sun spear of the sleeping pyramid had awakened, and that it was watching the guy and even mocking him. The solar spear asked if he really thought he could stand up to them with his skills. Ju didn't understand why this scoundrel was laughing at him. Not that he knew who this solar spear was, but it turns out that he, in turn, cleared the dungeon much worse than this, and he convinced the old man, whom even the ranker couldn't defeat. The guy told the skeleton tank that they were moving on, because this guy with the sun spear was pissing him off, so they continued on their way. The hero thinking that whatever was ahead of them, they had to get to him. And then, a few moments later, the system reported that 100 skeleton spearmen were approaching again. Seeing this, Dan Hong was terrified, thinking, is this dungeon really designed to spawn countless skeletons until he reaches his goal? The battle with them began again, and at this rate, it was clear that there would be no end to it. Therefore, the hero understood perfectly well that he had to get to the boss as soon as possible. To do this quickly, he asked the skeleton tank to give him his shield, because now he would be tanking. The subordinate did so immediately, and the battle began in a new key. The hero also asked the wizard skeleton to use an air shield on him, while the others covered him. They would ignore these skeletons and run straight to the boss's room. It became clear to Ju that he would either reach his goal or fall before that. Therefore, betting on this, he decided that this way the battle would go faster. Rushing into the attack, Dan Hong thought that he had little strength left, and that he had to keep fighting them to push these skeletons back. Even if he broke his left arm, he would use his right. The skeletons wielding spears immediately aimed them at his shield. But thanks to his training, the main character successfully deflected them. After that, of course, he didn't stop and rushed forward to attack, using his defensive weapon. The system kept telling him to break through the obstacles and get to the Sun Spear. Ju understood perfectly well that he simply had to get to this creature called the Sun Spear. His skeletons also did not stop and continued to fight. So, with such a small but brave squad, they made their way further and further. In the process, it became increasingly clear that there was very little left. And then, at one wonderful moment, a light appeared ahead through the darkness. Dan Hong, after seeing this, fell to the ground, for he was already quite exhausted. The system immediately said that the Sun Spear was smirking, and then his voice was heard, asking how a human with such a level of skill dared to challenge him. As expected, they were not insignificant people, stunning, but surprisingly weak. The hero immediately wondered if he knew something about him, since he was only an E-rank hunter, At that very moment, new skeletons began to appear, and that was bad. The main character became even angrier, because he realized that there was simply no end to these creatures. And again, the battle that had not stopped before continued now. The Necromancer's subordinates were also frequently destroyed, requiring him to expend his own energy on them. Ju realized that if he continued to fight like this, he would most likely die, so he had to focus on running forward no matter what. And as he continued to do so, he felt intense anger toward this strange dungeon. After a while, he was very out of breath because he continued to run stubbornly. And as a result, he saw countless bones right in front of him. It turned out that they were all from the skeletons he had just defeated. But this was quite strange, so he wondered if he was just running in circles. After all, whether he went forward or backward, nothing changed. And while he was thinking about this, he heard the sound of bones again, which could only mean one thing. Indeed, a new 100 skeletons were approaching, so the finger didn't have to constantly fight him. He could no longer think rationally and was having fun thinking about what to do, whether to fight them or just give up. At the moment, the big problem was that he only had 20 energy points left, and if you look at it rationally, there were only 30 skeletons left, which meant there was no choice. They had to hold out as long as possible, and the hero ordered his subordinates not to let them get close to him. His skeletons immediately obeyed the order and rushed into the attack. Ju, in turn, decided that he had to break through while his skeletons were fighting for him. It turned out that he had to gather his strength, because there are no dungeons that cannot be cleared. And soon he found himself at the top of that very pile of bones, even though it was damn exhausting. At the top, the system continued to tell him to break through the obstacles and reach the sun spear. The guy couldn't figure out where the sun spear was, but then he suddenly looked up. There was something strange there, shrouded in darkness, and Ju thought, maybe that's it. To check it out, he immediately turned to the skeleton tank. He ordered it to climb up to him and throw him there as hard as it could. The sun spear smiled, asking if he had finally noticed it. Let the foolish man come to him if he dares to do so, and does not chicken out. He, in turn, would turn him to ashes, calling him an insignificant little man. The hero noted that this was good, and they would see who would win. His subordinates threw him with all their might, and Dan Hong flew. Several glowing eyes soon appeared from the darkness that had formed on the ceiling. The main character, in turn, was not at all frightened by this and continued on his way forward. And only after a short period of time did the system congratulate him on reaching the sun spear. It also said that the ancient skeleton spearmen were disappearing right now. Ju was happy about this because he realized that he would no longer have to fight them. After that, he shouted that he had finally caught the scoundrel, and now they would see what he looked like. But the system turned red and warned him to be careful, because the sun spear had been summoned. On top of all this, the memory restoration skill was immediately used, and in the near future, the guy would be transported. Inside the memories of the main characters, he saw ancient times. Right before his eyes, the sun spear appeared, which he had been as a boy. But it was a completely wrong life that could be imagined, and he killed the man who tried to attack him. The boy said that these were the people who started bullying him, and also those who isolated him, so let them not accuse him of cruelty now. After these memories, a little more time passed, and now people were praising the sun spear, saying that he was a great hero and warrior born in the Desert Empire. They said they were going to follow him and asked him to take their poor souls and save them. Hearing this praise, he only smiled and asked if they really wanted to be saved. Then he stunned them with his words, telling them not to even think about it. One should not think that to survive in this desert, only one thing is needed, and that is death. Therefore, he immediately raised his mental spear and told his subordinates to do so. Of course, they obeyed his order, and all of them did so. The sun god then declared that from now on, they should kill each other. It was necessary for them to mercilessly exterminate their fellow creatures and burn everything to ashes, like a parched sun. As he said these terrible things, he just laughed mercilessly, literally mocking the people. At that very moment, the system informed Ju that the memory restoration skill had ended. A bright flash flashed before his eyes again, preventing him from looking ahead. But when the bright light began to subside, the face of a young man was visible ahead. He had large dark wings and spears in his hands, and apparently was that solar spear. The main character began to look at him closely, and saw that he had no eyes. Immediately, vague thoughts arose about whether this dungeon was really rank B. It was very strange, because it seemed to be a master of all techniques. Finally, the boss spoke to the Necromancer, calling him a vile and evil person. Then he angrily asked if he was here to refuse him too. At that very moment, he lunged at the man with his own spear. Dan Hong realized that this was terrible, because this guy was going to kill him. Suddenly, someone grabbed his arm, literally dragging him aside, and the spear wielded by the sun spear flew to the side. The boss of this dungeon was immediately surprised, thinking, "Did I really miss?" The one who saved the main character was his master, who asked if he couldn't control himself. The hero couldn't understand how his senior could be here, since his energy was at 0, and he didn't have the strength to summon a skeleton or an elder. While he was thinking about this, the Sun Spear asked how he had managed to dodge his attack, and he asked if this little man really thought that a simple person could resist the technique of his spear. After that, he aggressively rushed into the attack, but the master of all techniques blocked it with his shield. The system reported that the old man had used the absolute shield skill at its maximum level. Don Hong immediately fell to the ground due to the shockwave, so the master called him a stupid boy and asked how a student could not distinguish between illusion and reality. The boy couldn't understand what he was talking about and immediately began to think about it. Then he began to get up, saying that it was unreal, but the old man replied that it was all true, that this place existed in his mind. While he was unconscious, this guy with a sun spear invaded his mind. He is not yet someone he can face, so for now, let him step aside. The master asked if he was really a monster who ruled the world. It was truly fascinating. His spear skills, in turn, are several times stronger than those of the master. The main character asked if everything was really that bad, and the elder replied that he was a fool, because Ton was only talking about his spear skills, and overall he was much weaker than him. To think that the master only found his entertainment after death. It seems that he did not choose him as his disciple in vain, and preparing for battle he shouted at the Sun Spear to attack. The enemy in turn had no intention of stopping and rushed into the attack. In the process, he shouted that a simple man had once blocked his path. These same people had blinded him for no reason and mercilessly taken away his freedom. Therefore, he was going to make them experience the same pain that he had experienced. The hero watched the burning carefully from the sidelines and couldn't understand what it was that seemed familiar. Suddenly, an interesting thought came to his mind, which he immediately confirmed. If he remembered correctly, when he first entered the pyramid, he discovered a connection between this underground chamber and the profession of a hunter. We are talking about the dead spears and daggers that the guy was associated with. On top of that, the movements of the dungeon boss were very familiar. Remembering his spearman, the hero thought that it was him. The guy was surprised, and the system reported that the indignation of the Sun Spear was immeasurable, and his indignation at humanity pierced the heavens. Therefore, it is necessary to smoke the Sun Spear in order to achieve the true awakening of the Bone Man too. Understanding this information, Don Hong immediately turned to the elder. The old man did not understand what he was doing, but he had already said that this guy was beyond his power for now. The disciple noted that this was not the case, because he simply had to do it, and asked him to let him deal with it. At that moment, the system informed the young man that the sun had bought him and was paying attention to him. Don Hong also did not look away and watched. His master asked him what he was going to do, if he had any way to do it. The apprentice said that this creature was the skeleton he had summoned, that is, his child, but his elder could not defeat it, and he had to do it himself. The old man was very surprised to hear these words, and asked what he meant. The hero understood that this was true. It had never been the master's scene, it had been his scene from the very beginning. So the boy said that it was his mind, so he would deal with it. He would have to do this until all his hatred was gone, until he had exhaled his father and given up. Therefore, gathering his courage, he immediately set out to do so. The Sun Spear called him a dirty man, a liar, and a vile person. He, like all these insignificant people, is simply insignificant. So does he really think that you can understand him? Don't make me laugh. He hates people with all his heart and therefore curses them. Having said these words, he grabbed his spear and rushed forward, shouting that he would die. Ju saw that a swift attack was being prepared against him and that he needed to defend himself somehow. That is why he put his own hand in the way of the blow in the hope of saving himself. But unfortunately for him, he failed to defend himself and soon had a huge wound. The Sun Spear did not stop there and continued to strike. The master, in turn, just watched from the sidelines as his student was beaten. The boy's exhausted body soon fell to the ground, covered in blood. At that moment, he used his pain resistance skill, but the hero felt that he was in a lot of pain. However, even with such serious injuries which could have been fatal, he was still fine. Therefore, he immediately got to his feet and wanted the guy in front of him to give him everything he had. The spear in his hands began to glow yellow at that moment. Ju, leaning on it, was even able to get to his feet, even though his body was torn apart by the spear. But he got up because he wanted the Sun Spear to unleash all its anger on him. His opponent wondered if this man really thought he could bear all his resentment. It was simply impossible, even if he could understand him. Such arrogant words angered him greatly, and he rushed into the attack. The main character, in turn, did not stand still either, but simply began to fight him. The spears clashed in a fierce battle, and only the sound of iron striking iron could be heard. In the process, the Sun Spear said that there had never been anyone on his side in this world, that he was half human, half beast, a hybrid between a human and an eagle monster. He then asked if there was anyone who would like him for who he was. After these words, he pressed even harder and knocked the spear out of Ju's hands. Then he shouted that he should never have been born, because from the moment he was born, people had been stabbing him with knives. On top of all that, they took his eyes and tried to cut off his hands as well. But that's not all, because they also tried to take his ankles. So he asked the man in front of him if he knew this terrible pain. While the sun spear was talking, it struck the unfortunate man directly with the spear. Although the hero had serious injuries, he still said that it must have been difficult. After that, the interlocutor said that there must have been people who felt sorry for him. However, even if that was the case, in the end, they were all the same. They feared him and stabbed him in the back. This continued until his emotions died, and people were nothing but lies and betrayal. They treated him like a monster, so he asked if it was wrong that he became one. Suffering serious injuries, the hero wondered if this was the process of letting go of resentment. And yet, despite the attacks, one could feel that he was gradually weakening. Of course, this creature's emotions are very strong, and they are quite difficult to understand. So soon, the heroes asked him how long he was going to continue grieving. If he continued to endure all this pain, who, in his opinion, would suffer? Throwing himself at him once again, the guy shouted for him to think about it. To be honest about the whole situation, he knows very well the reason for his pain. Sunspear continued to be angry, telling him not to try to judge him as he saw fit. If he says he knows the reason for his pain, then in truth, he admits it. But so what if he was abandoned and his emotions simply disappeared? They festered for hundreds of years, leaving scars that will never heal. So it's unclear what this man in front of him is trying to change now. Juho noticed that he was saying that the past cannot be changed. That is why he suggests that he be reborn only for himself. His interlocutor could not have expected such a proposal, so he asked what he meant. The hero noted that he had died and become a restless spirit who was still tormented, and that those who had tormented him were no longer there, and he had killed them all. Sunspear said that this was true, and now he remembered everything. After all, it was here, in this very place, that he buried himself after killing all those people. So does that mean he can now live a new life? So he asked if he was telling him to live a new life. The hero noted that he understood him correctly. The question was not whether it would be right or not. He was not saying that the people who destroyed his past life were right, nor that he who had killed countless people was right either. But at the same time, there are things he wanted to do and things he couldn't do. Ju tells him to enjoy them too. He's talking about the things he wanted to do but didn't have time to or couldn't do. Even if only for a moment, the guy really felt his past. He felt what caused him pain, what emotions he experienced, and what he wanted for himself. And in those very memories, he realized that he wanted to see the world. He was actually interested in the soft sand beneath his feet. In addition, he was interested in the camels that roamed the desert with people. The Sunspear thought about it for a moment and said that it was true, because he was interested in the whole world. And this was regardless of the good and evil of all people, and this fact cannot be denied. The main character asked if that wasn't enough for him, and his interlocutor asked what he meant. Don Hong stated that, to be honest, he could not fully empathize with his pain. He felt it for a brief moment, but nothing more. Therefore, he does not want to successfully express his feelings, and should not simply do so. He, in turn, simply wanted to say, can't he be honest with his desires, no matter what kind of pain he experiences, and no matter how bitter it may be? He just needs to think about the fact that he can go and see the whole world. Sunspear asked if he meant that he could show him the world. The hero smiled and said that it was true, because he was a necromancer. Although he is cursed, he is still the one who controls death itself. The world he lives in is completely different from the one he used to live in. But at the same time, there is a possibility that he wants to see a world he has never seen before. If this turns out to be true, then let him just take his hand and serve him. At that moment, the system continued to report that the Sunspear was still thinking. Suddenly, the interlocutor turned to Ju and asked if he was different from those other people. After all, as a person, he is the absolute ruler of the ancient empire of the desert. Half human, half beast, that is, a hybrid that has no equal in this world. He is a spear to smoke the high sun. Thus, it turns out that the Sunspear serves no one, especially if that someone is a human being. That is why he was interested in whether the guy was ready to become his master. Information about a hidden quest appeared in the system window. This is a hidden condition for the stage of the Sunspear's resentment. It must be noted that he is a true master. After proving himself, Kostyan will inherit the memories and will of the Sunspear. The hero understood perfectly well that nothing could be done about it, and that meant he had to become a master. So he turned to his interlocutor and asked how he should prove it to him. The Sunspear noted that it was very simple. Let him accept his attacks and experience the true power of the sun, not just the remnants of resentment. This raised the question of whether he could do it. Without a moment's hesitation, Ju told him to attack at any moment. His interlocutor did not stop, and after hearing this, rushed into the attack. The hero had no intention of retreating and stood his ground until the very end. Until the very moment when the spear came close to his head. At that very moment, there was a bright flash, signaling that something had happened, and when the bright light disappeared, the hero found himself in the desert. Behind him was an old man who said that everything had gone as it should have for his student. He had successfully managed to resolve the child's resentment. In addition, the system reported that his willpower skill had been improved, and he had acquired a higher level willpower skill. He told his mentor that his abilities were not important to him. In that case, he would gladly fight them again and again. And just as the sun spear was about to attack the guy, his spear stuck into the ground. And that guy said that Ju was really different. That's why he knelt down and said he wanted to be reborn, calling him his master. This meant that this half-human recognized him as his lord. The system then informed the hero that he had fulfilled the hidden conditions and cleared the scene of the ancient Scorpion King in the desert, and for this he would receive a reward. At that time, a fairly large event was taking place in one of the establishments. Many people were having fun, enjoying the festive atmosphere that reigned in the area. But this was not the case for everyone, such as Gi Soyul. She was drinking a glass of wine alone and thought that it was very dreary here. The girl attended this event at her brother's request, but it was such a waste of time that words could not describe it. She thought she could endure it because it was a chance to socialize with the other rankers. But compared to that old man, everyone here was just a bunch of babies. She hoped to finish as soon as possible and leave, but apparently it was not meant to be. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a guy who noticed that he had been looking for her the whole time. They hadn't seen each other in a long time, and he was curious if she remembered him. After that, a conversation started between them, and the man asked if she remembered the ranker he had befriended when he traveled to America last time. He and some other people really wanted to meet Soyul. I wonder if she wants to meet them. By the way, my friend has some exclusive limited edition whiskeys. The girl, in turn, didn't really want to talk to him, so she kept glancing at her watch. In the end, she said she would only stay until the end of the day because she had a prior appointment. Her acquaintance asked if she was really leaving so early, since the party had just begun. Soyul turned away and thanked him for today. Her companion walked back with her and stared at her back for a while. He was also angry at how annoying she was, and he didn't understand why she was acting like she was so special. So the rumors that had been going around lately were true, and she was hiding a boyfriend. This was quite interesting information, which meant it would need to be verified. The main character finally returned from the dungeon he had recently entered, and the first thing he did when he returned was breathe a sigh of relief. Then he immediately fell to the ground, exhausted, thinking he was about to die. Looking around, it became clear that the sun had not yet set. Soyul told him that she would be gone for about 6 hours, so she should be back soon. Suddenly, system windows appeared before the guy's eyes, informing him that his skeletons were being restored. Interestingly, all their indicators had increased. His skill level had also increased to about 8 or 9, especially for the spearman. Now he was different from the others, because he had inherited the memory and will of the Sun Spear. The name of the Bone Spear changed to Sun Spear, and all its stats increased by 10. Ju was delighted, because all 3 of the added skills of this attack were used by the Sun Spear against him. The first of these is the dazzlingly bright solar combo. Next is the Raging Desert, which covers the entire field with an attack similar to a sandstorm. And in addition to all this, there is the Flame of the Soul, which burns the soul to temporarily increase movement and attack speed. Don Hong was delighted, because they were all simply incredible. But now the guy just can't call it a bone spear, so he'll call it a sun spear because a sun spear sounds too disrespectful. But that wasn't all, because he had to check the reward. The guy overcame it from an immeasurable level, and a great achievement was accomplished. For this, he was given a reward, and he received a golden random box. The most interesting thing was that it had the highest rank. Ju, in turn, is a hunter with rank E, and he has never even received decent items. And now he has an item of such a high level, and it's just amazing. The system immediately asked him if he wanted to open the golden random box. The guy immediately wanted to do it, and it began to open. As a result of these actions, the item in his hands rose up and began to glow very brightly. At that moment, as the light faded slightly, some kind of item became visible. The system immediately congratulated the guy on getting a high-level item. This item is called the Fire Dragon Staff. It is imbued with the power of the legendary Red Dragon and has several effects, the first of which is a 100 increase in vitality. It also reduces the duration of skills by 20%, and increases the power of the fire attribute by 100%. The hero was happy about this, although for a high-level item, it's not that much. But when used correctly, the stronger the user, the more destructive this item becomes. The main character immediately became very interested in how much it would cost on the market. To do this, he opened a special app on his smartphone and posted an ad. But the commenters did not appreciate this request, because they thought that an E-rank hunter could not have a high-level item. After reading their comments, Ju became quite angry. He didn't understand why he still had to prove to them that it was true. So he took a photo of the item so that they would believe him. Then he posted video evidence attached to the ad. Now people believed him and wrote that this item was simply insane, but it was strange why it had such characteristics. Some people didn't understand what this object was, because its statistics were clearly abnormal. On top of all this, it was surprising that Ju's question appeared at the top of all questions. What was even more surprising was that this question even made it into the news. The only good news was that, fortunately, the Hunters Board had good security, and the guy's personal information should not be leaked. Well, in just a few minutes, the guy received a lot of messages, and he didn't understand why there were so many. Because of everything that was happening, he hastily decided to forget about the sale, as he was not yet ready to attract so much attention to himself. Suddenly, he thought about the fact that there was no rule saying he had to use it. In any case, his life force had been restored, so he could test it right now. In fact, a few seconds later he tried to use it. The system immediately reported that using the skill to summon an awakened skeleton would consume 10 vitality points. The guy summoned his wizard and immediately turned to him. Okay, then he handed him the staff and told him to take it in his hands. Then he stunned him by saying that this staff was now a gift for him. Naturally, the subordinate immediately took it and began to examine it joyfully. At the same time, information appeared in the system window that the bone staff equips the fire dragon's courses. Ju was happy because usually a necromancer's undead cannot equip items, but this in turn worked, and it was unclear what to do, as this was his first high-level item. He began to wonder whether to give it to his subordinate or not. Perhaps it should be sold, as it could fetch a good price. The wizard noticed his master's unkind gaze and tried to hide the staff. Don Hong immediately told him that this thing was very expensive, so he'd better give it back. The skeleton shook his head as if refusing, and the guy didn't understand if he was really against it. Then he breathed a sigh of relief, and said that it was better than nothing if he could use it. The guy thought that maybe one day his subordinates would achieve true awakening, like a solar spear, and then it would most likely be the right choice. He figured out the achievement rewards, and now he would look at the dungeon rewards. And so he received a high-level racial conflict root item, which is associated with a certain profession. Ju immediately wondered what was meant by profession. The item is a catalyst. It is capable of revealing the secrets of hidden ruins. Among its effects is the ability to open the forest and stone dungeons. It is also tied specifically to the guy, and this item can only be activated by hunters of rank S and above. Now the hero realized that he had received another catalyst, and immediately remembered the conversation. Soy Yul said that catalysts are also a kind of fateful opportunity, and as a person progresses, related tasks will appear. The chains of tasks continue to increase the rank and eventually reach rank S or higher. All the catalysts she knew so far were exactly like that. Don Hong wondered if this dungeon could be related to other skeletons, such as the Sun Spear. What if the 10 skeletons he had were absolute beings from their own worlds? But wouldn't that make the profession too powerful? The guy didn't understand why he felt that the mysterious system was only for him, although it soon became abundantly clear that he was overthinking the whole thing. Therefore, his main goal at the moment is to become a ranker. In that case, he should use this system himself. The skeletons used by the main character were better known as bone men. They are undead creatures whose entire bodies consist of nothing but bones. So they are undead creatures that cannot speak and cannot do anything except move their bones. But then a spearman appeared after the incident in the dungeon that Ju had recently passed through. Right now, he speaks and calls the guy his master. He was also surprised because he could really see, which surprised Don Hoon even more. At the same time, it is illogical that a skeleton without nerves or muscles can walk and fight. And then Giso Yul appeared and said that it was truly fascinating. A skeleton that can talk is such a rare sight that other necromancers would be speechless. Ju indignantly asked what kind of skeleton it was. He asked to be called the Sun Spear because he was one of a kind. He then asked if the girl was sure she could stay here. His companion told him not to worry because she would protect him until he became stronger. But she added that this would only last until he reached the A rank. When he reached that rank, he would be able to take care of himself, and joining one of the major guilds would not be difficult. And at his current rate of growth, it wouldn't even take that long. Don Hong smiled and said that this couldn't be, because he still had a D rank. Then Soil said that, to be honest, she still couldn't believe it. When they first met, he was about at the level of 5 D ranks, as a porter. And now, just looking at this skeleton, or rather the Sun Spear, he was already close to the B rank level, and Don Hong himself seemed to be improving every day. Ju understood everything and turned to his subordinate. He understood that the pace of growth was definitely disrupted. If this absolute being, which once surpassed the entire world, regained its original strength, it could become even stronger. Therefore, he asked if he needed to personally supervise his training. His interlocutor noted that everything was correct, and that he himself could hone his spear technique. Although this fragile body was still unfamiliar to him, he would try to quickly regain his original strength to help him. The necromancer said that was fine, let him train himself. Sunspear obeyed his order and immediately began training. The main character continued to watch his training, and he became curious about when his rank would increase. If he was given an item that unlocks at the C rank, then there must be a way to reach that rank. This meant only one thing. The guy's next goal was to reach that rank. After a short time, the heroes, along with Soyul, moved to another location, and there the girl said that the guys should definitely go that far. Ju noted that she was helping him, so he thought it was wrong for her to sleep on the roof every time. At the same time, she doesn't need to worry, because he will never cross that line. Just like yesterday, she can spread her sleeping bag there and sleep. The guy also thought about who his guest might be, but he couldn't give away his mattress, because he believes that comfortable sleep is quite important. His conversation partner noted that he really shouldn't have gone so far for this. The hero did not understand what she meant by this, because they should clearly understand such things. He thought that he was still considered one of the weakest in this society of hunters, and it would be bad if it became known that he had treated her badly by making her sleep on the street, because in that case, her brother would find out, and then he would be in trouble. Yi So-yul said that he had misunderstood, because she meant separation. The guy was immediately embarrassed by this, asking if that was really the case. The girl said that if she had taken everything, there would not even be such a division. After all, his head would have fallen off in an instant. Ju immediately became very wary and did not understand why she was so strict with him. Soyul, in turn, continued to smile and said that she meant that it was pointless. At that moment, Dan Hong wondered if she spent all her time thinking about killing someone. And while they were chatting amiably with each other at the front door, someone began banging furiously on it. This immediately alarmed those inside. The hero couldn't understand what was going on, because no one should be there at that hour, so he wondered whether he should open the door, because if it were the high-ranking hunter Soyul, she would have noticed him first. Nevertheless, he opened the door and immediately asked who had come. It turned out to be a girl in tears, and most likely she lived there. She immediately asked if he was Ju Dong-hoon, and the guy couldn't understand how she knew him. The girl realized that it was him and began to tearfully beg him to save her brother. Ju was surprised and asked her what she meant. The girl handed him a piece of paper and said it had been left at their house. He immediately took it and saw a man who was tied up. A note was attached to the photo, saying that Ju Dong-hoon should be sent to Seondo near the Han River by 8 p.m. If they reported this to the association, her brother would die, and if anyone other than the boy came, her brother would also die. The hero did not understand what this was. Rather, it was a group of hidden shadows, because only these scoundrels were capable of such deeds. Gi So-yul approached and said that she had no idea they would act so openly. The tearful girl was very surprised to see her, as she did not expect to see a ranger here. The Dark Empress said that their methods were exactly the same as those of the group of hidden shadows, and since she was staying close to Don-hoon, it meant that they had resorted to kidnapping. Then she showed her phone and said that on top of everything else, she had just received a message saying that the second squad had been ambushed in the Hellhound dungeon. It seemed that this very villain would try to deal with it as best he could, so she shouldn't worry. He was just letting her know that if she had time, it would be great if she could help. Then Ju said that the Hellhound was Nick Zakan, known as the Master of the Hidden Shadows group. The girl noticed that it seemed they had also contacted Parang, and that was the perfect plan. The hero understood that she must be worried, and he couldn't believe that they had attacked the Parang Guild at all. And yet she remains here, probably because of her promise to him. Based on this, Don Hong said that they had no other choice, and that it would be better for her to go to Parang for now. The Dark Empress said she couldn't do that because her brother's rank is 58th. This means that he is not so weak that he could be destroyed by some small group of hidden shadows. But compared to him, Ju was alone, and once she left, who knew what might happen to him? The guy noted that this was indeed the case. But wouldn't it be better to rescue the kidnapped person first? They asked him to come alone in the end. His interlocutor said that it was an obvious trap, but the guy knew that. He understood that the Hellhound was busy with Parang, and besides, the old man and the Sunspear were on his side. The hero noted that Soyul had already talked about this, that life is a journey that begins with connections and ends with connections. Someone is connected to him, and it is because of this that he suffers, which means that the guy simply cannot just stand and watch. Moreover, he does not want to be some kind of cowardly hunter, and must give back what he has received. After listening to this impassioned speech, the girl realized that he would not back down so easily, and therefore agreed. She informed him that she would first go to Parang, quickly take care of some business, and then join him. She had told him last time that she was ready to introduce him to many of her connections, and now it seemed that this could happen much faster than she had thought. The guy wanted to ask what she was talking about, but she had already disappeared, and he became quite curious about what many connections meant. The kidnapped brother of the girl who came to the main character was near the river. Next to him were assassins from the group of hidden shadows who had committed the theft. One of them was looking at his watch, waiting for 8 o'clock in the evening. There were only 5 minutes left until the appointed time, so the leader said that the guy should be here soon. Indeed, he and his skeleton were approaching. It became clear to the people from the permanent shadows that he was approaching them, so they grabbed their kidnapped victim and threw him aside. The man was conscious and saw the main character and tried to say something but couldn't because his mouth was tied shut. One of the patrol shadows smiled, asking if he had really come, and if he had the courage to do so. Judging by the skeleton, he must be a low-ranking necromancer. The hero realized that all the hunters in front of him were of rank A, and perhaps there were also hunters of rank B. His interlocutor noted that the guy must know why they had called him here.